Okay, let's get the meeting started. Welcome to the Council Land and Shore Committee meeting for October 5th. I'm Stacy Goodman, and next to me is Mary Lou Polly, and next to Mary Lou is Paul Winterstein. We have several items on our agenda. We'll start with the moratorium update, but the next item, Agenda Bill 7317, and then the next item after that, Agenda Bill 7342. We are going to flip those because Jen Davis-Hayes can't be here until a little bit later, so we're accommodating her. So Keith Niven, Economic Development Services Director, can you start us off with the moratorium update, please?
So, thank you, committee. So last meeting, we provided this graphic, and we updated it a little bit as we're moving towards the end of the year and moving our work items towards completion. What this is really trying to show is kind of where we are in things. And, excuse me, and what this shows for me, what I'm pulling from this is, we have two items that we're hoping to complete in October. It's obviously dependent upon the conversations this evening. That's Architecture and Urban Design Manual and the vertical mixed use. Assuming we have a conversation that works out well this evening, then those would hopefully be referred to the October 16th full council meeting for action. We are right now working through the inclusionary revisions to Central Issaquah. I've jumped down to affordable housing, sorry. I'll give you a little bit more roadmap next time. And, the conversations are really focusing on, right now we have a 10% requirement in the core and nothing outside the core. Because you guys are contemplating some changes to vertical mixed use, it's actually probably creating 3 tiers of area for us to think about, and I'm just kind of seeding the field for you guys to start thinking about this. Because we're pushing the FAR up potentially so much for vertical mixed use, that's considered a give to the developers. So we can now push that 10% up to potentially 15%. Just for the area that's vertical mixed use. The 10%, unless the council wants to do some changes to the core would likely stay where it's at, which is at 10%. And then to get us some affordable housing outside the core, right now what we've been talking about with Arch is looking at increasing the FAR outside the core. Because frankly, it's really low, and I think we can do that and be consistent with the vision that we all have for Central Issaquah. But what's going to come to you guys is probably some scenarios in terms of thinking about changes to the existing regulations to get us inclusionary benefits, how far you're willing to go. And then also right now our requirements are for 70%. I also asked Arthur, I said, I think we want to have a conversation about 60 and not 70 because one of the things I saw from you guys as we talked through Polygon was that the 60 seemed like it had maybe some additional value to you over maybe a 70 or an 80 might. So he's looking at that now, and it's probably going to be like a menu of choices that we'll be able to go through, and then you guys hopefully will be able to give us some thoughts on what you think is maybe how to optimize those different choices. And then multifamily tax exemption is coming to the full council. And then is going to services after that. So it's going to a work session and then to services for a conversation. And that's only to apply that as a pilot to the TOD project.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
So on the, now that you brought up the inclusionary zoning one, is it possible that you can do what you did with the parking, which was to give us a range? So instead of just recommending 10% or 15%, because there are changes, there are gives, give us a range when you bring it back.
Okay, well definitely we can do that. And then visions. So visions, neighborhood visions are the tail of the dog. So they're running last. We expect to, that's not on tonight's Land and Shore, is it? It's the one on the 25th that Paul's not going to be at, that Bill's going to be at. So it's going to be at also the Cow in October, and then the idea would be to go to PPC in November and then come back to Land and Shore in December for a mid-December approval, hopefully. So that one's the one that's kind of in last place at the moment, but our hope is to, we're going to take it to PPC twice. The idea was to take it to PPC twice because this is very visionary and policy-oriented, to rather than go to them, which is kind of the typical practice in one meeting, and say, here it is, give me your answer. It would be, here it is, take public comment, and let them actually think about it for a couple weeks, and then come back the second time, kind of like we do with our other commissions, and try to get an answer out of them at the second meeting. So that's what we planned for Visions. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you. Next item, Agenda Bill 7342. I said earlier we're going to deal with this item first because for Agenda Bill 7317, Jen Davis-Hayes can't be here until probably 7. So go ahead and start with, take care of Agenda Bill 7342, presented by Lucy Sloman, Land Development Manager.
Hi.
Hey.
As I mentioned to some of you, I'm under the weather, so I'm going to sit. Okay. So we started this moratorium work plan items, actually, architecture and urban design have been bundled together. We started this in April and have been to council in April and July and then September, the end of September and tonight, reviewing and working through the topics to address these two moratorium items. What we're asking tonight is for a recommendation so that we can meet the proposed adoption date of October 16th. And our goal is to seek concurrence with the administration's recommendations on the 6 items that were in the memo that we sent you that was in the packet. So the first item is color. And the questions were, are earth tones the right colors? How can we make sure this isn't going to be boring? Or are there ways to make sure that this meets our vision? Crandall Arambula prepared a final graphic for us to show what earth tones are. Generally, they are the 5 colors of the color wheel that are shown with some brown added to them. In reviewing the comments and concerns that we've heard from council, public, and the commission, the administration recommends keeping the provisions as they're described, but allow one accent color that is not an approved color not to exceed 15% of the surface area. So let me unpack that slightly. So you can see, as Development Commissioner Morgan mentioned, that earth tones are identified with everything except for Grange, which has a lot of neutrals and naturals. Part of our idea of this accent color came from the fact that Urban Grange, as you can see down here, allows 10% of an accent color. And so we thought about that a little bit and proposed the 15%. And I wanted to show you what 15% means because obviously that's important. So the slide on the left shows just a block of 15%. The slide on the right shows that if all the things that are highlighted, the belly band, the canopy, the corner boards, I'm going to be tested on my architectural terminology, which I'm going to fail at. But all of these things that are highlighted, If you did all of those in a unusual color or an accent color, that would equal 15%. So you couldn't even do all of the trim on the face of the building. That would be 37%. So that would be the way the proposal might play out.
So why if one warm accent color of less than 10% is allowed for urban grange, why jump to 15% in sort of any color you want? Because 15% doesn't sound like a lot, but if that could really stand out. And I'm wondering,
A comment, just from a lot of the Development Commission proposals that I looked at, the one thing that seemed to be the nagging problem a lot of times was that accent color. And it tended to be associated with maybe somebody's corporate logo or something like that. And it seemed to be more about advertising than architectural appeal. And so I think you could probably convince me that 10% of a warm color elsewhere would work, but not an accent color. I just remember too many conversations about why turquoise, why neon green, and it's like, I don't know. I think that it doesn't add to the architectural style necessarily, but maybe at 10% of a warm color, that might be a place to go.
So we aren't suggesting that it would be signage. We are talking about architectural elements such as doors and trim, so that it isn't the main body color, so that it is a little bit of sparkle maybe, but not the predominant color. I think that was, the reaction of the community for Atlas Blue is that was a significant body color, and so that seemed like we would not want it to be on the body. We would want it to be part of the trim.
so so the way I read it, there isn't a limit on color. So it could be 15%, it could be neon green, and we'd have to approve it. And it could be one giant block of 15% of the building. I'm just trying to consider what worst-case scenario is.
Sure.
So people don't talk about it now because we have another building that we've talked about. But if you go back to the early 90s, it was the Target building. And it was a huge community issue. So I think we have one of those every once in a while. But I think to allow, I don't know what our limits are. Maybe there are not any.
Well, so one option would be to only allow tints and tones of potentially the colors that are outside. So we have greens and yellows and oranges that are in the family of approved colors. So tints mean that white has been added, tones mean gray has been added, and that would give you a softer version of colors in a small range, or a more limited range.
So so let me just say that I am not completely opposed to allowing non-warm color if it is limited. So I'm not opposed to a fun door. I am opposed to 15% of a building that's just unlimited color choices and unlimited places where it could go. I think that has the potential to just backfire.
Right, and I showed this only to suggest the magnitude of that area, not to suggest that that would be a good way to apply an accent color. So, the idea would be to write it that it would be for these kinds of elements that are shown here in the right-hand picture and not shown across the body of the building, only in trim for doors and windows, doors potentially, but canopies, but not body.
I would have to think carefully about trim. I would, if I was going to be comfortable with that, it would be limited to certain features, and I'm not even sure I would allow all colors. I'm just a little bit concerned about an open-ended, you get 15% to play with.
So is it both those pieces, Stacy? Is it 15% seems like maybe a lot, and the fact that it's open to colors at this point?
Yeah, I think 15% is too much, and I think anything and anywhere is not.
All right.
So we can do 10.
So,
Well-
but there's two others, and then there are four more. So.
Sure.
I'm generally the last person you're going to want to ask to pick a color.
You don't have
Tastes
to
are
pick a
little-
color tonight.
Yeah, I know. Tastes are a little bit, well, in a way, because we've got it limited to these earth tones, and you're making comments about maybe the primary or maybe the tint or the tone. And but I did agree, when I first heard it last time we met, my first reaction was just, is that it is kind of limiting the idea of having some additional option. Certainly would hope the tastefully chosen, if they're complementary colors. There's a lot of experts out there that know how to match colors. So when I saw the proposal, I am in agreement with what you proposed. I think that is just it allows for more option, but still it's very constrained by the overall body color that's allowed.
That's a good question. Would you, are you opposed to allowing any, even if there were specific limits? Like, let's say you're allowed to do something with a door that was non-approved, or anything you want for a door, or?
Not opposed. So I guess my thought is sometimes the door is one of the main architectural components of it. So are outdoor seating, umbrellas, and signage. So those are opportunities to add something to the building, but I'm still not convinced that opening it up, we've been doing too much hoping over the years that we get some great stuff, and we get some not great stuff. So I guess, Lucy, I have a question for you.
Sure.
If you take us down on Front Street to a building that we currently have, can you give us a visualization of what this looks like? Tell us something that we're looking at now that has a color that is bright, and on the bright side of the scale is an accent color covering 15%, because it's not the Village Theater, it's not the library, it's not the Olde building. So I'm trying to visualize, where is this now where I could go, oh, I like it. I actually like the Olde building, the theater, and the library, and they don't do this. So I'm not sure that this is an absolutely necessary element to get interesting architecture.
So the buildings I can think of on Front Street are body colors in the hues. So they are the other end. They are examples of what we would not want to do. The example I think of is on Queen Anne, so that doesn't help unless I can find it quickly on Street View. I apologize. I don't think of
okay.
something off the
That's
top
okay.
of my head to show as an example.
I guess I also realized too that, we could get through the next 10 or 12 buildings and they're attractive, and we realize it might be good to change the code and make it more flexible, but to start off flexible and then go, oh gosh, look what we got this time, I actually think we should just stick with the architect's recommendation. Except if you want to exclude the door, I totally agree with you that I think the door is something that is different and an opportunity to add some splash and add tables and umbrellas and add that color at the main level. That's fine, but the trim and 15% is, I just don't know what we're going to get.
And that is actually the example I think of was, and this, is not totally relevant, but it's an apartment building, sort of motel style, that was painted in sort of a charcoal gray with 2, 3, 4 colors of doors, not primary, but in bolder hues, not lime green, but kind of a rich grass green or a sort of marigold, and that was very handsome. I mean, but that was also because it's a building without a lot of detail, which is not the way I think our buildings are going to come out based on the requirements that have been set up through the design manual.
Okay, so I think my thoughts are evolving here, and I think I tend to be more concerned about, I tend to agree more, I think, with Mary Lou's comments about we have been relying too much on what we hope to get and what we think we might get, and you can always change it. We can always change it, and then people can paint their doors bright. So I think I'm comfortable leaving it the way it was proposed without allowing an additional non-approved accent color.
Okay, so let me just make sure, because what I heard sounded slightly different than what you just said,
Okay.
which was not to do the 15%, only limit it to doors?
No, I'm changing my mind
Okay.
about. Yeah, I'm not in the experimental mood.
Okay. All right, so just axe this.
I would, but Paul doesn't feel the same way, so
That's right.
yeah.
But it's, I don't have heartburn over it. I like, I can't create it, but I know it when I like it. And there's a lot of good artists out there, and a lot of people with really good tastes, and things can be done really well. And so that's why I thought, that this is, and generally I think people want to be proud of what they put out there. And rather than receive scorn, people, architects and designers want to receive praise, and they want to be known for what they've done. So don't fear the worst case so much. I like the idea of giving the creative and creating an opportunity for interesting visuals, because it's really, overall, there's so many elements that are going to define the character of the area. This is an important one, but it's measured at 15%, so that's my thinking. Why we can do it.
So let me ask this. So I think on this one you have a thumbs up from Paul on the recommendation and 2 thumbs down from us. And so then, correct me if I'm wrong, then it would get recommended sort of out. We can explain that it was 2-1, recommended out of, we've got more to go. So as we go forward, I'm just wondering if this is what we do. They go, the recommendations are in or out kind of based on the majority of us, and then as we deliberate on council, it'll be up to us to propose, like Paul could propose a change, and the council would vote on it if it's something that he thinks is important enough that he wants to propose change to. And then, of course, at the next level up, whether something like that is important enough to vote against the agenda bill based on something that's in here. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And we're all going to differ on the rest of these things too.
Absolutely.
Sure, and one thing, just as not trying to complicate things, but I will. So another option for you guys would be, right now, the architectural manual is what it is. There's not an administrative adjustment of any of the requirements in it. It is what it is, right? And so if there was one of these things, maybe this one or maybe a different one, where you guys say, you know what, I don't want to give it outright, but if you want to make it an adjustable standard, you could do that. So if there was a really great project and they wanted to use it tastefully, they could say, here's where we want to exceed the color allowance, and they could apply for an adjustment of standards to do that, if you wanted to build that in as a little bit of flexibility, but leaves the control to the city, just as another choice.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of adjustment of standards. I think that's one of the reasons why some of the Central Issaquah projects did not rise to the bar and did not pass when we did the audit. So I don't want to put that flexibility back in.
Okay.
My personal opinion.
Okay.
Comments? Okay, looks like
So next item is urban core, 1 or 2 styles. Currently, urban core just allows Northwest Contemporary. Northwest Revival is limited to traditional Issaquah. The approach has been a distinctive center using a single sort of modern style. However, Northwest Revival and Northwest Contemporary are 2 versions of the same thing, the Chicago School or commercial style architecture. The administration had recommended no change, but in talking to Crandall Arambula, they still support their original recommendation, but they don't think it's a terrible idea to allow both styles in the urban core if the city chooses to do that. They don't think it's a bad choice.
I want to start with a question. In the third line down, well, I'll just read it for people who are watching. It says, urban core has 1 allowed style. Crandall Arambula's recommendation is to have a distinct contemporary style that over time will distinguish the urban core as a compact, modern center with taller buildings, a light rail station, and a distinct feel. So have we decided that there will be a light rail station there?
Well, in the sense that that is the general area where we're anticipating it, but no, it has not been decided.
Okay, so I would request that we take that out because I don't want a document showing that somehow we have had any kind of conversation or discussed what that
So that is not
area would-
proposed to go into the design manual.
Sure.
It was simply sort of a piece of the vision. They have discussed a lot the light rail station. It's definitely part of their vision. We concur that the city has not taken a position about the location.
Okay, I was just surprised to see it there.
Okay, sorry. Painting a picture.
Sure.
So what is actually in the guidelines standards now, and what is it that you're recommending? What kind of?
So we're recommending leaving the standards as they are, urban core, allowing only Northwest Contemporary. After we wrote the memo, we were able to reach Crandall Arambula and ask them, is the way we're characterizing that sentence that you read, that bad sentence that you read?
Say it was a bad
I know, I'm
sentence.
just teasing. Is that a correct characterization? Would you have concerns if 2 styles were allowed? Because we had definitely heard it from the commission, from the council, from the public, that was something worth considering. And they said, basically, either one is fine. You could keep it at 1 style and have it a contemporary center, or you could allow the 2 styles. And this was sort of more my commentary, that because both of them are versions of the Chicago School commercial style architecture, that they would still have a certain relationship to each other. It's not like the difference between Grange and arts and crafts. They are going to be, one's going to be a little more traditional, one's going to be a little more modern, but in general, I think they're going to feel somewhat similar. That's why I put a range of pictures down at the bottom of the slide. The 2 left pictures are shown under Northwest Contemporary. The 3 right pictures show up under Northwest Revival. And to me, they have a comfortableness with each other, so that if you did decide that that's the way you would like to go, I just wanted to give you some visual images to reference in that discussion.
So the recommendation says no change, but in the document right now, it only says you can use 1 style, right?
Right.
But in response to concerns, using both styles, okay. So do you want it to stay, is staff saying it should just stay the way it's written, or is staff saying you can do what you want?
I think you can do either one.
Okay, great. Thanks.
The answer from Crandall Arambula was equally vague. I had to go back to them a couple of times to make sure that I understood their intent. I think that so my conclusion is that they are 2 different methods to achieve the same distinctive core. And so I don't think that there was one right and one wrong. There are some places where we would say we would strongly urge not to do this. This is not one of those.
Oh, I think you were.
I do support adding the second style. I think perhaps with building heights and massing, and that we're going to talk later about vertical mixed use, there are going to be elements that define this at the core, including the fact it's at the core. And so using building styles it would be, I mean, who would really see that? Because I just think it's going one step too far. I think there's enough things, just physical location, the vertical mixed use that we're going to be talking about, and the size of the buildings themselves because of what's possible. I think we're doing quite a bit to make this area stand out.
So you're supporting 2 or 1?
Yep,
Sorry.
yep.
Okay,
I would
thanks.
definitely, I think, an
Yeah,
additional
sorry.
choice.
I just spaced out.
That's okay. Yeah, maybe, yeah, additional choice. I was given the reasons why. I just didn't
Yeah,
think
yeah.
the limiting to 1 was necessary to make it stand out.
Sure.
I'd like to.
So do you? Okay, great.
Yeah. We'll have,
Can we have those right there?
yeah.
Well,
We also will,
Well, we should-
just as a reminder, we'll also have public comment after this agenda bill, so those
right,
are,
we can come back and have a final
if there's
discussion.
any changes in our
Right.
thoughts.
I do commend Crandall Rambula that when they added Northwest Revival, they used a lot of Seattle buildings because we have some really excellent
nice.
examples. Heights. This is my crazy graphic to try and explain heights. There was a question do we have enough heights related to the limitations of various architectural styles to address the different heights that are allowed in the zones of central Issaquah? And the administration's position is that we do. So let me walk you through my little graphic here. 4 of the zones have a 65-foot maximum height limit. One zone has 85, one zone has 125. So when you look at 65, although Northwest Contemporary is not allowed in these zones, you would have all of these styles. So you would have 3 styles that would go all the way up to 65, and almost every style would be at 4 stories. The reason some of them are bicolor, I just want to explain that. For arts and crafts, it depends on the use. Residential and I think mixed use can be higher than commercial. For Western Falls Front and
So
urban.
Lucy, your Western Falls Front doesn't show.
Oh, it sure doesn't. Okay. These 2 boxes are colored in on my screen.
No, okay, yeah, no.
Okay, so
with
there is a
Northwest
base
Lodge.
height of 2 stories for those 2 styles, and with additional architectural treatments, they both can go up to 4. So all of these styles go to 4 in the traditional Issaquah area.
Okay. So question, without talking about FAR, with just talking about height, is it possible in the urban core to do Northwest Revival and Northwest Contemporary at heights that are lower than what you're showing there? So say 65 feet and lower. So those are just the max. They could
Right.
do a 2-story or a 4-story.
Right. So just wanted to make sure it showed up. For instance, Northwest Lodge, they only recommend 3 to 6. They do not recommend 1- and 2-story Northwest Lodge buildings. So thank you for clarifying that. So when you see it going all the way up and down, that means anywhere from 1
Okay.
to the maximum. Now, I didn't show the maximum on Northwest Revival because we had not talked about it, but they do not see a concern with it going to whatever maximum height limit is allowed. We had originally thought that they were saying it should not be below 4 stories, and that was the other point I clarified with Crandall Rambula. They said no, they were fine 1 story to the maximum height limit. So I corrected the graphic, and we will clarify the language.
So I guess what I was getting at is we wouldn't want to do something, require a certain style that would be a disincentive to appropriate redevelopment for the market. If they could only do 2 stories, we still want them to be able to, okay, that's great. The question about the height. We have 2 development agreements that are on either side of I-90 and close to I-90 with very tall building heights. And so the 125 max in the urban core could be buildings that are close to 90 and far away from 90. Is there any consideration to having those specifying that taller buildings had to be closer to 90 versus at the edge of the urban core?
So we made heights off limits. We were simply dealing with architecture and urban design, and I realize that you could say that this is part of urban design, but we really said that that was a separate conversation that might be a result of looking at some of these items, but we did not ask anyone to, people did weigh in, but we did not ask anyone to weigh in.
Or no? Paul hasn't spoken.
And just for clarification, Lucy, so in our document, you do have things like 4+ stories or minimum 4 in this table under question number 3. That's what you're going to clarify?
Yes. Because that was, again, something I got after the memo had gone out to you, and we will put together a memo of edits based on this conversation and your recommendation, and so that is one of the things that we will clarify.
And just because, one last quick comment, because you mentioned it in your memo as well, in the very last sentence in number 3, it does say this element of the manual be monitored. So this idea you're recommending, I'm just saying, okay, so add it to your dashboard somehow.
So we were going to talk about that at the end.
You have a couple of those in here.
Yes, we do. And we have at the end, we're going to talk about a couple of different ways to monitor if the council was interested in doing so. Okay.
Next.
Hillsides and retaining walls. Those, you all discussed that a fair amount. We had recommended not including hillside guidelines because there were so few sites, most of them had been developed or were outside central Issaquah. The concern was, are we covering walls and hillsides? I provided in the memo a bunch of language that is in central Issaquah standards for walls. But we did look at hillsides, especially since there is one hillside site which is undeveloped. And we proposed language to add to the urban design section as guidance for developing on hillside sites.
So I'm still not sure that this one goes far enough. I'm thinking of the Inniswood development on Newport Way, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think they have retaining walls as high as 30 feet or 40 feet on that one at the back edge. It's very significant. I mean, the public comments that I heard was we took away the toe of a hillside to put a building in. I mean, the building's not built yet. That was a concern, and so I actually do think under this revision, even though there may only be one hillside in the boundary now, because boundaries can change in the future, we should have something in here now for hillside that reflects the values of our community, which is we want to respect the hillside and not remove it to build a building. So I actually think it's the language that you propose isn't quite strong enough yet.
Okay. So I think my question would be, if we are respecting the grades, are we saying that that site would be no longer developable?
No idea. Not saying no excavation, but we definitely, many times have not minimized cuts and fills. We've removed an enormous amount of land and reshaped hillsides significantly. I think of the big wall up in Tallis. I just don't think that the original vision for Tallis was to regrade the upper portion so significantly. So I'm not sure what the answer looks like. I think you're going to have to come up with some language, but I think we need to stop reshaping landforms. We need to respect the landforms. So it doesn't mean it's unbuildable, but we don't take away half a hillside anymore. I don't know what that looks like.
Okay.
I think we ought to do it.
I would support stronger language. I wasn't quite sure what we were trying to achieve with this, unless it was better landscaping and screening. So, anyway.
Well, it was partly to make sure that buildings did not have lower levels that are unarticulated because they are not maybe visible from the road, but they're visible across a ravine or a creek or something like that. The other piece was to, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out what I did with that language, but I'm not seeing it. So there was screening, there was articulation of the building, there was screening of the building, there was lower walls or terraced walls, and what I'm hearing is that that the language that is currently that the treatment of walls, as we have in central Issaquah, is not enough. You would want terraced walls, for instance. Is that
You know what I may do, just for Paul's benefit, because I had this correspondence just with you, but one of the things I pulled out of the Whistler one was hillside overlays to preserve the environment and the natural landform to the greatest extent possible. New development should be a complement to the natural environment. Cuts and fills should be minimized and blended into the existing terrain. No retaining wall higher than 10 feet. Timber walls discouraged, blah, 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 blah. Terracing. Slopes of cut and fills should be determined by whatever. Minimum allowable slopes. I really actually think we need to be that strict with what we're doing too. And then I appreciated your comment that it's a citywide issue. I actually think in our comprehensive plan docket, we should see an item next year that talks citywide about how we're going to build on slopes, because we haven't had that before, and we should have that.
Okay.
Some of the few remaining unbuilt parcels in town are on slopes, and I'm still not sure that we've quite figured out how to do that yet.
Okay. I'm looking at our comp plan docket carrier.
I wrote it down too.
Any comments, Paul?
No, I don't. I appreciate you pointing out what Inniswood had. I was taking a look. It looks like the highest wall in there is just 10 feet, but
Oh, might be. I thought it was much higher.
yeah, I'm just looking at the cross sections there, and we don't know how much other shaping, but that's, we were talking about walls, retaining walls.
Actually, what would be good is if we just verify with Inniswood if it would meet what I wrote down for hillside overlay.
Okay.
Would be interesting.
Anything else on that one?
Okay. Next was tops and roofs of buildings. Are we doing enough to have them blend into the hills? There are 7 architectural styles. 4 of them require pitched roofs. 3 that allow flat roofs require decorative cornices. There are a couple of different ways the cornices are described. Just to round out the discussion that we started, Central Issaquah encourages a lot of things that I think we would support. The one thing that it does require is a screening of rooftop mechanical equipment.
So a question about encourage. So between the task force and the actual design standards themselves, I think the task force was envisioning requiring active uses, but the design standards has encouraged. So we do have 3 or 4 flat roof structures, I think, either under construction or completed in Central Issaquah, with 1 that will have rooftop activity.
Right. So Inniswood, Gateway does not have a flat roof.
Taking
Vale does.
Vale
And
does,
they're
and has
using their
activity.
rooftop.
Inniswood does and doesn't. Atlas has flat roof and doesn't, and the new hotel has a flat roof and doesn't.
Right.
So is Encourage going to get us there?
Encourage is not going to require them to do it. Now, I will point out, having worked with the building official, because there's on Vale and a new building that is coming soon to a urban village near you, they are doing it, and it is you cannot really use your whole roof. You can only use a very small part generally because of building code and exiting requirements when you're up on a roof. So it's not that we can't have active uses up there, but to fill a roof with active uses seems challenging. And I have not researched, like, does that mean if they put in more stair towers that went to the roof, it would solve it? I don't understand the building code aspects well enough to speak to that.
From the task force report, weren't they wanting to require it because of the coverage, that there wasn't going to be as much available space on the valley floor, and so that's why they wanted to have this activation? Like, are we losing a key component of what the task force was hoping to accomplish, which was more outdoor space?
Trish, do you have a memory of that?
I think they were just trying to get as much as they could. It wasn't that there was more or less. They were just looking for all opportunities.
So, I think that what, and this doesn't really answer your question, it's just an example. Vail is an interesting one. They are using, I don't know, maybe a third to a half of their upper roof. Most of their lower roof, which I think is at above the second floor, and then have a community space down on street level. So I do want to be careful that we are not pushing all of the active uses up to the top of the building and not having active uses at the ground plane. But I don't think that, the building code may end up limiting that.
Not proposing changing.
I don't have any comments.
I'm good with it.
Next. Urban parks, what does inappropriate element C mean?
So we looked at some of the intent of inappropriate item C, which we thought, which said grand, large, open spaces that don't facilitate use was inappropriate. So we looked at what we thought the intent was, which are these sort of three middle bullets, and some of the objective and descriptions, and proposed revised language for inappropriate item C to better meet what we read the intent as.
So, it's kind of awkward to start off with, not to start off, it's kind of awkward to have what we don't want, but I understand there's value to saying what we don't want, but I think I would start with what we do want.
So let me just pull that up for a second. Okay. Sorry, this is not rolling. So every one of them has appropriate as well. So I show you that just so that you have the context that we are not simply talking about what we don't want, but that there is already some items there that describe what we do want.
Thanks for the reminder. So I admittedly didn't read all of this again today.
Understandably.
So I thought about maybe what we were trying to get. Don't we want these large spaces, don't we want them to facilitate, I thought maybe frequent, and we want them to be used. We want them to be used a lot. So the words frequent and year-round, I thought about. And so I wondered if maybe we're trying to say spaces that what's inappropriate? Spaces that are not designed to facilitate frequent and year-round use. So I don't know how that fits in because I reread it today. I don't know how that fits in with the language that we have. The recommended text, which is inappropriate, would be spaces sized for grandeur. I don't know what that means. not the uses and nieces. If I'm coming in on a project, I don't know what that means.
So my suggestion would be that we use your language about frequent year-round use. That's consistent with Central Issaquah, some of the community spaces. So, and that definitely is a value that is in Central Issaquah, so I think it would be great to add it here. In terms of the specific language for this, I would, I think the concern is that sometimes there is a desire to just have something big and impressive, but not that doesn't necessarily, if you have small apartments, a big impressive plaza, it may not actually suit the needs of the users that are nearby. And so
Maybe adding something like, spaces are not designed to facilitate frequent and year-round use or some other useful identified purpose or something.
Okay.
I don't know.
So maybe it's taking this first part that you've identified, the frequent and year-round, replacing the front half of the sentence, taking out the grandeur, and that, so spaces that are not designed for frequent year-round use or the uses and needs of the district.
Yeah, I don't know about uses and needs of the district. Because I would rather be a focus on not the uses and needs of the district, but what that space is going to be used for.
Right, and I think we're trying to tie what the space is going to be used for
Sure.
to what's in the area. So if it's a predominantly office area, it's going to be different than a residential area. And of course, we're hoping for a mix of uses, and that means you would be responding to both lunchtime office users as well as seniors, families, children.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think what's hanging me up on the uses and needs of the district is, are there going to be spaces where we need to think more broadly than just the uses and needs of that district? Because you could get a large space that is going to attract more than just folks who live and work right in that district. So
how about if it was uses and needs of the likely users,
maybe my
colleagues?
council members fellow council members have ideas.
I didn't have anything to add on this one.
Okay.
I thought just the description was sufficient. I also know that with the parks plan and the strategic plan, and there's going to be some real specifics in there, it seems that creating some other, we could simply say, we could refer to the parks plan and make sure they handle it there, because it'll be comprehensive for the whole city. This just creates some other type of park specification, which we're already working on.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. And you are probably several times more familiar with the parks plan than I am. But we gave these pages to Jeff Watling and Jennifer Fick and asked for their feedback. And they had some questions and comments, which we passed on back to Crandall Arambula. And I said, well, maybe these pages shouldn't be here. And they said, absolutely, these pages should be here. We see these as a useful tool. I think my question about the parks plan is that I think it focuses more on public spaces than private spaces. And I think these are the tools that we have to work with developers. Now, I may be wrong with that perception of the parks plan, but I thought maybe that was why Jeff and Jennifer were supportive of keeping these in.
They were supportive of keeping even the C in?
So they did not edit the language.
Okay.
They were talking at a little bit higher level. So I am not suggesting that we should not change C. I'm just saying as a framework for implementing the design manual and the urban design portion of the design manual, they said keep these pages in. So I don't know that you should read more into it than that.
It sounds like almost like In other words, what you might be saying is that Jeff and Jennifer comment may be something along the lines of, this is not inconsistent with our parks planning. And that these are a little bit different. We're designing spaces with buildings as opposed to green spaces.
Right.
So my sensitivity is, I've said it for every year I've been on council, creating spaces that aren't used. And we have them, pocket parks, I'm not a fan, generally speaking. There are many up where I live that don't get used. So that's my sensitivity to creating language that forces the applicant and the reviewer to ensure that whatever the space is that we're creating, that it's used.
Right. Well, and I also take your point that the reality is that it's not like you only go to the place that's near your house or your office, that you may go across town, and it should feel comfortable for a range of users, not just a 3, 5, 10 block radius.
I was the one who raised it originally, and just this idea that we were going to have language, I mean, how does somebody look at that and say, okay, okay, grand, large, open spaces, but it was that don't facilitate use. You decide what you're going to do with that. I mean, it's a park, and I think you have others. I mean, I just think that I like the description one that you pulled out. I mean, it's, I think, variety of amenities, contribute to the health and recreational needs. That says a lot. We could say some more. There are parks, maybe some more of the features, but that seemed to be, I just thought it was odd that we had something in there. How does someone, it just seemed, if it's not going to influence anything, I don't care, but it just seems odd language to have in there that don't facilitate use.
I think we're fine taking that out. The question is, are we replacing it with something? I mean, I would be happy to try taking a shot at the language and sending it to the committee, if that would be helpful.
We want to hear a public comment before we kind of say what we want to do.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be
Okay.
fine.
So I
is
have
that-
one more slide.
Sure. And then, so one more, so when you're done, then tell us what the next step is, so everybody knows if it's coming back to us, if it's not, and
So one thing that we were talking about when we were thinking about implementation is that the manual would apply to new construction, not to additions, not to repainting of buildings, not to window replacement, that it would apply to a new building that was done under Central Issaquah, that was developed under the design manual. I think no one, for instance, has to get a permit to repaint right now, and so the thought of regulating painting seemed like that was going to be a challenge. Whereas when we're doing building permits, we would be able to, with the new buildings developed under the design manual, apply some conditions to ensure that they understand the expectations of the palette.
so that leaves potentially a lot of options for not getting what we want in this manual.
Well, I think we thought about some of the buildings that have been built in various eras. If they wanted to paint their building, would we have to decide that a 1960s motel was a Grange and then apply those color palette to it? It began to raise some questions that seemed challenging relative to implementation. I'll leave it there.
Comments and questions?
I would generally agree with that first bullet. To apply to new. And for not only the reasons that you have, but I think that there is, there's quite a bit about practical matters just for our own city to try to manage that. have to dabble in everything if it's already there.
Sorry, are you done, or did I interrupt?
No, that's it.
Okay. So don't we have a color palette for other areas of town?
Old Town only.
How do
And
we-
staff find that pretty hard to use.
Or-
Buildings get painted, because again, we don't have to have a permit. Buildings get painted, and then it's an enforcement action. So,
We have enforced that before.
yes.
Okay, thanks.
So second thing was the point that Paul brought up. There are a couple of items that we talked about that could be monitored and be added into the existing monitoring that we have committed to doing. For instance, there is a 1-year and 3-year monitoring that we do, and we would recommend not creating a new process, but adding whatever items that we want to be monitoring into the existing monitoring activities. Are these the 3 items that you would like to have monitored?
Existing reports, it's the annual report that comes out?
So, right, there's an annual report, annual monitoring report, and a 3-year monitoring report. So what we did last summer, that our famous or infamous July 11th meeting, was the 3-year report. The dashboard is the 1-year report.
We don't need to add color to that because we'll hear about it.
Hopefully not.
If there's a problem. So I can't,
So the current format of the report is more about measuring building stock. You got X number of square feet of commercial, you got X number of housing units. And we're doing that to track our progress towards some targets. So what are we're monitoring height, styles, and roof forms so that we are ensuring.
I think just to make, I think it's, so I don't do those reports, so I'm not quite as familiar with all the components, but I do know, for instance, that you monitor the adjustments of standards, and there's a report provided on that. So I think it's probably more sort of quantifying activities that are taking place to understand which styles are getting used, which building heights are, what heights are being associated with what styles. What was the, some of them have multiple roof forms that can be selected, hip, gable, something else that I can't remember at the moment. And so what we could do is provide some information, another chiclet chart or something that shows what we have gotten relative to those particular components, more for informational purposes, just to see how the manual is being implemented.
Okay, that makes sense.
so that was what I was thinking about when you were talking just now, is you referred to the infamous July 2016?
It's only been a year.
It's only been a year. So that wasn't part of our 3-year monitoring report.
No, that was.
That was a special report.
Special report.
Special music and everything. As you're talking monitoring it, incorporating monitoring into existing reports, or existing reports are not in the format of the July 2016 report.
Reports change all the time. I mean, we got more information. If there's a different type, a different format, different what needs to be, we're just adding to the information that we're collating so that we have a snapshot of what's going on. There may be some goals, there may be some objectives, sometimes they're just counts. They're just letting me know about activities and results. They've identified in here, you've specified that there could be some potential issues, therefore we're going to track it. And my point is simply, okay, let's hold ourselves accountable. If we think there might be an issue, we should track it, figure out a way to track it. Add it to an existing report, that's fine.
I mean, I think that, for instance, the dashboard was not part of this, but it's evolved in response to the kind of information and the way you want to see it, as well as staff trying to find ways to communicate that information to you. So I don't think that it is outside the realm of what we're doing already.
So I just wanted to point out that we got, the moratorium is in place not because of any existing reports that are required under the Central Issaquah Plan. It was a special report that had different information. So if our commitment is to provide information that's helpful for us to determine whether or not we are getting what we envision under all, the existing plus whatever we amend, then I'm fine with that. But it was a completely different and special report. That's my concern, and I know you understand that.
So I think that we can always talk about and amend what is in the reports. I think staff would just like not to have a third report that's required and look for opportunities to be reporting comprehensively on how Central Issaquah is being implemented. And if we don't have the right components, then we can talk about that next year when we're updating Central Issaquah in response to these work programs that we're doing this year.
Totally agree.
Okay.
The only thing I would add, Lucy, is if, can you go back to that? Or, sorry, it's on there. 8 styles and reforms, it would help if you're going to include it in some sort of report or dashboard that you actually tell us what why we're measuring what we're measuring, what success looks like. For example, just a pie chart that shows, so many of these different building forms doesn't tell us if we're actually getting what we want. It just tells us how many different building forms we use. So that would be great.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Do you have a preference between 1 and 3 years?
Reference on 1 and 3 years for,
Adding it to the annual report or the 3-year report? I mean, just my reaction is 3 years. It takes a long time for something to happen. It's not that the council can't ask for something, but I would recommend giving us an opportunity to have enough information to be useful.
I initially agree with that.
So the last 2 points are kind of to Stacy's point. What we would do from here tonight is prepare a memo with all the edits that would be made to the document. That would then, it would be the document, the 914 draft, and then this memo, and then following adoption, we're going to work with an editor and create a final document because it's in a little bit of a wonky version, as we've pointed out to you. I'm going to take a break while you're having public comment, and I'll be back in a moment.
Any other questions from you guys before? Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, time for public comment.
I have to go touch, which you just touched.
Ugh.
Oh, my God.
You don't have to touch it.
There's 2 bottles of Purell up there.
I don't want to get which she has. Okay.
Stool. So, I guess I'm going to start. This is a lot of material to comment on from your memory, so watch me bounce. Flat roofs should require green elements. I don't see that they need to be entirely active, but I think some of the comments that we heard at PPC is you have this very hard edge, like Atlas, that could have been softened dramatically by just having some green components. That doesn't mean that you have to have people partying up there in the green components. And you see solar isn't a party animal either. And so it's, I don't think you need fire access things for that. But I just noticed the library has a flat roof. They need a party, but that's not the central Issaquah plan. The Regency and the core along 2 uses, love it. Thank you very much. The colors, I love the colors, but you know, they're food colors. So for me, it's pumpkin, curry, and pea green, and there's some baby puke in there, right? Which is just going to get tiresome. So I expect in a few years, we're going to have a color switch because everybody's going to be going, oh my God, we're molding. But, you know, for the moment, okay. Hillside treatments, we need stricter language. We've gotten in a habit of just mowing down the land and forming it to our use, but then we find that the water likes to go where it wants to go anyway, and so it's not terribly effective. It would be better to go back to building with the land, and of course, less fill, less cut, lower retaining walls. I've been talking about that for so many years, I can't even tell you. So then Mary Lou had sent out a thing from Whistler, and there was one sentence that I liked probably better than any other sentence, which is the whole is better than the sum of its parts. And to me, what is missing in this is context. Everything has to be about context, where it's placed, the buildings that it's next to. Are you shading the streets? Are you shading your public open spaces so that it's cold in the winter and hot in the summer? And there has to be an intentional placement of everything when you start building like this. And I don't think that is in here. I think that we're going to have a whole new habit of how something is presented to DC so that they can understand what context is. Because right now we just sort of give them this little thing and describe generally what's here and here and here. That is not going to cut it. But that whole how it's going to be presented and what they're going to have to provide doesn't seem to be hashed out yet. That gives me some sort of serious heartburn because it's hard to understand how it would be successful without that. And so the whole is better than the sum of its parts is something that we have been missing. We're like a polka dot land. We just do one little baby thing at a time. So our dashboard lacks judgment. All it does is it counts. And so what we need for this is judgment, and this could be a tool to help us understand what changes need to be made sooner rather than later, so we don't have to have a moratorium next time. So I discourage 3 years. I encourage 1 year, but I encourage not a counting 1 year, more of a, well, let's ask DC how it's working. Right? What gives them heartburn? And have them tell you what the issues are and what the solutions might be, because they're the ones having to deal with it the most. You're going to be seeing it yourselves as it goes around, because there'll be only a few things that will pop up and you'll say, oh, that kind of works, that kind of doesn't. If you're going to count something, what I want to see is I want to see a judgment on urban parks, which we haven't really gotten any of, and whether people are in them and using them, and also how are we being successful with our new interface with critical areas? Is that actually achieving something good, or are we just doing a lot of work and nobody goes there and it doesn't really improve anything? Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Hi.
I'm Jason Jorgensen. I'm the owner's rep for Timber Ridge at Hallis, and I wasn't actually here to listen to this part of the presentation, but wanted to weigh in on the retaining wall comment. And I agree with what you're saying, and we hate to pay earth movers to move more dirt than is necessary, and we always challenge to use the buildings in such a way to eliminate as many retaining walls by using the buildings to retain the earth. At the same time, I would recommend, being that we're in senior living, we know that steps don't work for senior living, and so there may be some appropriateness to have some language in the manual that gives some exceptions for senior living so that they, can accommodate no steps. Okay?
Thank you. Anybody else? Mary?
I just wanted to say with Connie's remarks on the green roofs, that was a very big part of the central area plan and the task force is that we have green roofs, and so that we protect the views from the tops of the mountains down onto the buildings. So it doesn't always have to be active, but that they be not only screened, but also be green and possibly help with the stormwater. The other thing, the Inniswood wall behind there is over 300 feet long, and it is over 30 feet in some places right behind. And if you look over around Fred Meyer, some of those areas, those are going to, again, be areas where you may cut into. Right above I-90, any place along there are existing hills that are still part of the central area plan. So I think it is really critical in both the central area plan and in the comprehensive plan that we clearly identify going forward how we're going to treat hills and if we're going to treat them better than we do now. And so that'd be part of it. I also find this just really hard to go through and review right now and be able to use the manual to give a comment on. So kind of with what Connie was saying is it really would be nice to see it a little bit more complete before we approve it so we can go back and actually go through it and see what would fit and how we can use it. The other tool that hasn't been mentioned, and I really think we need to, as far as placement of buildings, is use the advantage of the new technology with 3D printing. And we really ought to incorporate a model of our city, a 3D model, where we can, get down in and put a little camera in there and look along the view corridor and say, what is this, 125-foot building going to do to our views, to the existing buildings, and how it's going to look. And so incorporating that in part of the design manual, I think, on how it is presented and how it is reviewed is very critical too. And I don't see that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Eve?
I agree lots of things, and I don't remember each specific. So one of the comments made was on the difference between encourage and require and back to use. We should have require things to happen, not encourage them to happen. Another comment was that different architectural styles and how high the building should be, there should be some linkage between the two. And a style of a craftsman that's 5 or 6, 7 stories doesn't really look appropriate, so that we need to incorporate that into what we're saying. If we want it to happen, that's part of architectural standards and should be included. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ken?
Ken Eastman. First off, I want to thank the group for taking the time to work on that design manual. Seems like that's an important document that should help us get more of what we want. And I would say it's worth the time to get it right. So, when a building is built, you get to live with it for decades. So it certainly is worth taking the time. Secondly, thank you for the comments on limiting the cuts and fills and respecting the flow of the hill. I think parcel 7 and 8 up in Tallis is certainly the poster child for forming the land to create a flat neighborhood, but you can see that for miles around. Every time I drive up Newport Way from Target, I see it, and it's quite disappointing. 40-foot tall wall on the downslope, 50-foot tall cut on the upslope. 90 feet to create less than 60 homes up there. Thirdly, regarding the Central Issaquah plan, maybe I missed something, but it just seems to me like we have no big picture. We're focusing on the micro and ignoring the macro. I mean, where does everything go in the big picture? Where do the open spaces go, the parks, the playgrounds, the fire station, the schools? Where does the retail go? Where do the people go? It just seems like if you own a little piece of land, you get to put whatever you want on it if you meet the building codes. And so maybe that's just why it seems to me Central Issaquah kind of looks haphazard. Like I said, maybe there is a master plan. I haven't seen it. And if there is one, it certainly would be helpful to publish it. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any comments? Okay, seeing none. Lucy, I just have one more question. It said the 914 draft of the manual with edits will come out, and then where's the next stop? Is it back here to council? I can't remember. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It goes from here with the 914 draft and a memo. Staff is proposing that it go back to council for adoption.
On what date?
10/16.
Okay. Oh, maybe I did write that on the front. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. So. Comments on what you'd like to do, or you have additional comments, and then my question to Lucy is going to be if she, when we're done, if she has enough information from us to draft edits in a way that she thinks is consistent with what she heard from, I guess, the majority on each item. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
To me.
Comments?
Under different circumstances, I think it should come back to committee. I mean, there's still some significant things to do. But I know that we're pressed, our agendas and timing. So, but I think it's not a lot, but it would really, I feel real good if we all get to look at the final stuff before we send it all back to the full committee. And I don't know if I think you can make exceptions to that, but I would prefer that it came back. But I know that we have logistical problems just with that.
I would prefer it came back too. I mean, this is, to me, is the, next to the housing affordability piece, this is it. This is the big deal. So also too, I think it doesn't resonate maybe as well with the two other council members, but I am really hung up on the hillside piece and I want to see it. So I would like to see it again.
Well, I totally support that. But so what does it look like to come back? We have
So we should bring it back on the 25th.
I was going to say.
The November meeting is a landslide. I mean, it's
Well, let's hope it's
got more
not.
stuff than this one.
It might be busy. Let's hope it's not a landslide. So we have a special meeting on the 25th?
Yes.
Want to bring it back then? And then we can, does that give you time to
So-
go to the first?
Could we have some clarity on
Sure.
what items you would like to discuss on the 25th? So I heard hillsides.
I think we would just want to look at the final edits and see that they're, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about, reviewing the edits and for having a final look at the manual is what I heard.
So the manual isn't going to look any different than the one you have right now, is what we're proposing. You would get a memo,
Right.
similar to when we've done development agreements and listed those edits. Relative to what we heard tonight, color isn't changing. We're allowing two styles in the urban core. We're going to add hillside language, which needs to be revised. We need to work on the parks language. We're going to clarify reporting and the application to the new development. So those are the four things that I've heard tonight that we would be editing into the document for the 25th, unless there are additional items either that we haven't discussed with the council members or in response to public comment.
By editing the document, it would be editing sort of the memo, but not a final document until after council approves it, and then you edit the final document consistent with what council direction was. Well, I think you had something to say?
The objective would be at the regular council meeting that as a committee or the committee can say, we've seen the final that's in front of you today, and we're, rather than trying to figure out, okay, did they get what I meant? That's the reason to do that. And so hopefully that wouldn't be, that's not a long list. It's going to be some review for some of us. It's the 25th. Bill will be here. I promise to help him prep.
So 1025 special land and shore, and I assume, no calendar. Oh,
October 20, it'd be November 6th. First meeting in November.
yeah, we could probably get it back by November 6th.
Okay, so just to be clear, are you proposing, one or both of you, proposing that a draft final document come to October 25th? Is that what you're wanting to see?
Yeah.
Okay.
I cannot make a draft final document by the 25th. I mean, if you're saying,
It's going to be a memo that documents the proposed edits from this conversation in addition to what's already there that would be additive to the final edits that are done after council adoption. That's, it's the
The final proposed document based on land and shore comments would come to the council meeting.
so I want to be sure that we are using terms the same way. So even at council adoption, like a development agreement, we would have the 914 draft and a memo that identified where specific edits would go to. And then because we're going to have to contract with someone outside the city to...
That's not what I heard, so that's why I'm asking the
Okay.
questions.
I did intend the memo. I mean, I think just update the material you have here. You have an issue, you have a discussion, you have a recommendation, then we discussed it, and I think I would be satisfied, knowing then that
Okay.
the final from that is what we're going to, if it's still a memo form, and we have worked with this structure before, so I'm good with that.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Good with that.
Okay, so 25th with those topics and 11/16 for adoption, theoretically.
Oh, okay, I thought you meant 11/6, but that seems like...
6, no, you're right, 6.
Okay.
11/6.
I'm not fully functional.
Okay. Thanks, Lucy. Oh, I guess you'll be here. We got another one.
Susan, do you want to?
The packet's already up.
Okay, next item on the agenda, Agenda Bill 7317, also having to do with the moratorium vertical mixed use. Jen Davis Hayes is here.
Yes, thank you for switching order of the agenda.
What?
Okay. So, good evening. My name is Jen Davis Hayes. I work in economic development, and we are here to discuss the final recommendations of the vertical mixed-use project as part of the moratorium. And so, as a reminder, so we'll talk about the project schedule real quick. We'll look at the recommendations overview, and then how the overlay works. So similar, so we are here for the second time to Land and Shore, and the schedule is to then move on to full council for considered adoption on the 16th. Any questions about that? Okay, in general, I just want to review the recommendations. So again, for those of you who may not be aware of this project, we are looking at creating requirements for vertical mixed use in a geographic area. We had two consultants look at different parts of the market analysis for vertical mixed use as well as development standards to come to this point. And what the recommendations are, looking at creating there are three parcels within the Tibbetts Valley and Gilman neighborhoods that we're recommending that we require vertical mixed use on the street frontages. We're looking at changing the base height and set maximum and minimum floor heights, and then increasing the FAR and looking at decreasing percentage surface parking allowed, or another way to say that is increasing structured parking requirements. So that's the general descriptions. You have in your packets the actual more details, and we'll go over that. We were at Planning Policy Commission last week, and they didn't have one finding that they approved and passed forward. They recommended changing the maximum height for the overlay area. We had recommended 135 feet. They wanted to maintain the 125 feet, which it is currently for the urban core, and that's, again, with bonus density requirement. The administration concurs with that finding. If you agree with that, we will implement or to make that change to the final recommendation. I can go through and kind of talk about the details if you want to think about that without answering that. I mean, we've discussed these recommendations pretty thoroughly, but.
Yep.
Okay. And so for the proposed code amendments, so there are 3 chapters that have been amended. Again, you have all this information in your packets. So we do define the purpose and applicability. This is the map that it will be in the in the Central Issaquah Development Design Standards. So the hatched areas are the 3 parcels that will be impacted by this overlay. And then the black lines are where the ground floor commercial will be required. And just so you know, so this is following a map of what is a sketch of what the Mall Street is anticipated to be, but it may not be the exact same location. This is what we used from our circulation map that we have in the plan to be consistent throughout the plan. So there's a note on the circulation map that says that future exact location will be determined when development happens. One question we had from Planning Policy Commission was, it seems like really long blocks. The reality is that, again, when redevelopment happens, it won't be this long stretch between, let's say, Maple and 7th, that the block requirements are already in the Central Issaquah standards, requires about 250 or 300 foot length blocks, so that will be much shorter block areas in there. So any questions about the geographic area we looked at before? Okay. So again, we went through, and so actual code language, we just described a little bit more about the intent of the vertical mixed use overlay. And one of the things we were asked to do as well is when users are open up the Central Issaquah standards, how are they going to know that they may potentially be in this overlay? So there are several ways we added to make sure that people, depending on which avenue they enter the plan, are aware of that. So first, this map will be in here along with the current zoning map. And so there's a reference and the note that actually talks about going to section 44F, which has more details about what those changes are. So they will see first, actually, I'm going to go backwards. First, they will see this is the actual zoning map that's in there, and it's hard to see on the screen, but the area is hatched. It has a note that refers to this map, and this map also refers to 44F. So again, trying to, depending on what people see first, they then will easily determine that they are in the overlay area. And then in the section 4, chapter 4, we're looking at again, that's the intent statement, sorry about that, that we talked about before. But in there is an added table of permitted uses just for, I'm sorry, no. The table of permitted uses has some footnotes that we added that these 2 are the footnotes, and that refer back again to the map and to the 44F for more details. And so that is where, when we removed the drive-throughs, outdoor storage that we do not want to see in our vertical mixed-use area, or we have required from 60 feet from the corner of the building into the building, those uses of the retail, restaurant, uses and those corners that we discussed before. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm on cold medicine as well, so. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, using the table of land uses, we added 2 footnotes for that. And then this is the table that we added as a summary table that just has the vertical mixed-use overlay. And so again, here we did reflect the 125 feet that the Planning Policy Commission recommended as a max for the height. And again, so the changes here are that from the normal urban core are the FAR. Those have been increased. The base height has been increased to 85. And then that's it on that chart. Any questions or thoughts?
Yeah, Jen, why was the maximum impervious surface increased? It was 90 before, and now it's 95.
Yeah, it was a typo.
Oh, it's a typo.
So what we discovered was that, because we had this conversation in Planning Policy Commission about what should be 90 or 100, and when we looked into urban core, we're like, wait a minute, that's supposed to be 95. So in urban core, it is 95, and we obviously would maintain that. So sorry about that. Good catch, though. You know your tables.
So what are you looking for
Okay.
from us, and then,
Yep.
and then where, when you're done?
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, that's right. So the only other thing is, again, parking. Again, we mentioned that it increases it from 50% to 90%. So again, these are the 4 areas that, depending on how people enter into our development standards, if they are more reading the different intent statements, they'll see it there. They're looking at the tables, they'll notice it there, or the maps. So tonight, we are hoping for a recommendation to go onto the full council to consider adoption for these changes that we have presented.
I think it was in your, one of the tables. What is the difference between mixed-use residential versus vertical mixed-use?
Yeah, so it's you can see in the map back there, the mixed-use residential is a zoning category within central Issaquah. So the vertical mixed-use, I know it's probably a little too close for comfort sometimes, but that's the overlay that we're creating. So it's not a new zoning category, it's just an overlay.
What does it look like? What's the building form in mixed-use residential versus vertical mixed-use?
So mixed-use residential is that where Atlas is? Or is that the,
No, it's
that's the
actually-
purple?
The purple's mixed use.
Yeah, but
Mixed-use
mixed-use residential.
residential is the area that at one point I think he suggested
Atlas,
maybe we
Vale.
should take out of Central Issaquah. It's the
Vale.
vulnerable area that's
That's-
south of Atlas.
That's what I meant,
Can you
Vale,
show
where
us
Vale
it
is.
on
Yes.
a map?
I'll look for,
I'm just wondering if we're defining now vertical mixed use, should the MUR thing be removed at this time?
yeah.
So it's a zone, so if you want to change what it's being called to avoid confusion, we could, but it needs to be zoned something.
Okay.
Right? Whereas this is an overlay to the core zone.
And another question, just while Jen is getting that up. I'm not sure I understand the rationale why we landed on 125 feet tall, say, 3 or 4 years ago, whenever the decision was made, when in all likelihood, the next generation of buildings to be built will be 5/1 or 4/2. Why do we have a code that says go to 100 if we're not likely going to see that for 40 years? Like, will be the next generation of buildings. So why does our code go to 125 now?
I'll keep going, okay.
So maybe Trish, the question is, because I wasn't part of the task force or the code adoption, why do we have maximum building heights with density bonus for 10 stories when we are probably quite a bit away from being market driving that kind of a
Right.
product
You
here?
might recall that Rowley's went first, the Rowley Development Agreement, and we allowed them to go 125, and then I think at the end, we actually allowed them to go higher than 125.
They
So
can
Central,
possibly go higher.
right, so Central was lower, but we kept the base height to try to allow for more public use, or public uses like affordable housing and parks in that bonus to go to the 125 feet. So that's what the thought was. Even though in the future we could get taller buildings and they could start out differently, we were trying to get that public value from the base height to the max in the bonus density part.
So I guess in trying to look at a vision of what it looks like, it does make sense that hotels and office buildings, both the Costco and the Rowley ones, would want 125. But I'm not sure that the vision ever was to see 125 all along the valley floor.
It was only in the urban core. It's only that small
Or
area.
even just in the urban core.
Well, that was where the urban growth center was going to be, so that's the only zoning district that we were allowing that high, and Rowley.
So mixed-use residential, can you go back to that?
Yeah, so right here in this map, so it's the hatched area down here. Okay, so Vale and these other residential areas down here. And then this is, so just to be clear, this table that's in, this is a standard summary table. Can you see that? Yeah. The vertical mixed use will not have a separate line. We'll actually have a separate table, so hopefully it won't be as confusing, seeing that. But again, here's the mixed use residential that talks about, the base height and the max is 65, 80% impervious, setbacks of 7 feet. I think that's one of the big changes, basically from Atlas to across the street, where we've seen where you have to adjust for those setbacks and impervious surface.
Can you go back to the map?
Yes.
So Atlas was
Here.
mixed use.
Yes. Yep, and then here's Vale right here, so.
Atlas was mixed use, but we didn't get mixed use.
I'm not sure why they titled that, but it doesn't mean you have to have mixed use. It's talking about mixture of uses within the zone, I'm guessing.
Oh, maybe that
Not
is the
within
wording that is
building.
confusing. Maybe that's the wording that's confusing.
So the zone called mixed use does not require mixed
Right.
use.
That's why we didn't get
The
it.
only place we're requiring it potentially is with this hatched area that we're carving out of the core.
Yeah, it's actually in the urban core.
So mixed use residential is also not mixed use.
It could be, but it
Okay.
could not be.
We probably should add clarity around that. I think it's confusing. It's confusing.
Trish put that on the code clarification for 2018. Big list right now.
Well, if I were a developer looking at the map, I would think that I could, that mixed use was required in many more areas than it is.
Yeah.
Non-vertical mixed use, vertical, it's integrated into a single structure. Mixed use, without that specification, it could just be a mix of different uses within the same zone. It could be commercial mixed with residential.
Yeah, I think that's probably the intent of the wording at the time, yeah. Yeah, okay. Any questions about our vertical mixed use overlay? Okay. Do you concur with reducing the maximum height from 135 to 125? So we'll keep that in the recommendation, and it'll go to
What are the next?
public comment. Okay.
What's the next step before we go to public comment?
So that next step is actually going to referral to council.
Okay.
Yep. For adoption, for consideration of adoption.
Uh-huh. Thank you. Public comment?
Okay, 125 is better, but I have to digress on how we got to 125. The community, when we had our Lego blocks, they went to 85. And then it got pulled out of the community, went to the task force, and they came out with somewhat higher. Then we went through Rowley, and Rowley came out with much higher. But they also said you can only build these buildings so close together that are tall. So then all of this got popped back to council with some administrative juggling, and we ended up with the ability to have tall buildings in many places, but we are supposed to be able to protect the view corridors. So I don't know that all of that has worked. This doesn't change pretty much any of that. All this does is it mandates that we have vertical mixed use in some areas in case they decide that they want to develop, and it sort of fleshes out Mall Street. Not that we really know what Mall Street is going to be nor how it could happen. So my heartburn is incremental change. I still don't understand how people are going to, or if they are going to be able to do parts of their land and make vertical mixed use if they want to develop a corner. Are they going to be able to break it into separate parcels and start creating the small blocks? And the way it is written right now, I think they're going to have to blow it all up and do it all at the same time, and I would prefer to see the ability to make it happen in small forms. The other thing that gives me heartburn is the reality of the situation, which is we have a whole heap of critical areas in this exact area, and they are not mapped in any realistic way, shape, or form. So anybody who looks at this is going to be thinking that they have way more space than they actually have, and they're going to have to do considerable, I guess, work to see that they don't. And I would prefer to have a much more realistic presentation for anybody coming in wanting to develop this land to show the confines of what they have, even if it is simply what we know the last time we looked at the Maple Street wetland drainage ditch number 4, and of course there's the big enormous ditch by Gilman Boulevard. So I don't think it's fair to the developer to make it look like, wow, look, you have all this pink space. They don't. Thanks.
Thank you. Steve?
Hi, Steve Pereira. So 3 thoughts. One was, I pushed this from the idea of kind of like a TDR or a transfer of development rights. We have higher density in some areas and less density in other areas. We're encouraging density in this area along Gilman Boulevard, but can we have something that also excludes a corresponding density from some other areas as a way to compensate for that? I'm not seeing any linkage that has it. I think there should be. Second thought, at one point I had heard a proposal for Gilman Boulevard where it would be reduced to 1 lane in each direction, have parking and a bike lane. It seems like if we have this proposed area, that would eliminate the ability to have that option going forward. And has that been part of the consideration or discussion going forward? That should be part of the discussion. Third, links with Connie's comment. I was recently at the Tudabella Pizza and looking over the drainage ditch. I often talk about when I'm with my nephews, and they pointed out that there were 2 Safeway carts down in the drainage ditch, and we have all these wildlife areas and zoned areas. We're going to pack a lot of density in there. How are we going to protect and clean up that area and keep those areas clean? That needs to be part of the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. Mary?
I just want to reiterate, having been part of the Central Area Task Force, is we did not talk about 125. Raleigh development was not talked about before. We were not part of that. That was all done after. And we were talking 85 feet in those meetings, and that had to be with, affordable housing and other things brought to the party. And those buildings had to be sited within a specific area. So the first one that went up, then that's all that could go in the area, and all the buildings around it had to complement it. And it couldn't, block the view corridors, couldn't do the shading of the areas. And so that's when we talked about the taller buildings. We never agreed to 125 or that it would be, over all the area. So that was all done after it was taken from the task force with the Raleigh and the urban core, and we really weren't part of the urban core discussion.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Well, ready to move it forward, or you have comments? What do you want to do?
We need to move it forward.
What do you want to comment?
Jen, so all the content is here. I don't know what it's going to look like in its final form, but, and the people who will be working with it, I mean, you've shown us the content.
On the slide, yeah, in the package, it
Yeah.
should have the actual.
So thank you for that. And I think this idea, this is kind of is representative of what we were just talking about with the architecture and design standards, right? There'd be a meeting where we see all the content that's going to be in the final, in its final form. I'm just kind of using this to compare. So anyway, thank you. There's been many, been on the agenda quite a bit. We went through a couple cycles on this.
Yes.
Thank you. You know, I didn't mean to ask one question earlier, and I apologize. I didn't take advantage of it as well. Where you do, on the Mall Street, am I remembering correctly that there was at least one landowner already proposing some redevelopment in this area? And what is the
So,
east of Maple and west of 7th?
east of Maple,
Yeah.
west of 7th. So the Commons, is that what you're saying? Yeah. So we had one discussion with the ownership about, talking about what they may want in the future, but there has not been any real discussion. They definitely know that the future retail is changing and that they have a really great center. They're not looking to blow up and completely tear down, but that in the 10 to 15-year future, maybe start to do some changes perhaps, but there's nothing at this moment moving forward with that. So, but there may be some further discussions about development agreement, but that's the ball's in their court.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Everybody ready to move forward to the council meeting? Okay, 3 thumbs up, I hear. Thank you.
Is it going to, I'm sorry, consent or regular? I'm sorry.
Regular.
That's what I thought, but I thought I'd ask.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Next item on the agenda, end of development agreements, a discussion. There will not be action on this, presented by Lucy.
We'll see how far I last. Okay. So we also started this in the spring and have had several meetings with the community, with UVDC and PPC, and then some council work sessions. Last one was September 11th. Both development agreements have reached the end of their build-out period, and we had a public hearing on September 28th. You have not received the packet yet, so this is sort of preliminary conversation on some maybe high-profile elements of the plan that it would be helpful to staff, and we thought helpful to Land and Shore to begin discussion on these. We don't have to reach conclusion tonight. The items that we're discussing were in 2 different memos, and these are the items that we want to bring to you tonight. I just wanted to highlight what our goals are, because I think they sort of travel through many of the discussions we'll have. Number 1, of course, is retaining the character of each urban village, creating as few non-conforming situations as we can, replacing some outdated standards with things that are already used in the city, except where it will significantly impact character, and consolidating 2 of the smaller development agreements under the Issaquah Highlands regulations. So first one was a topic that was brought up when we were in front of the council at the work session. It related to the use of Central Issaquah standards for the urban villages, and a concern that this was not going to help retain the character. So this chart is not exhaustive, but it highlights some key elements. Predominantly that there are certain standards such as landscape, lighting, parking, processing, roads, not VUNRFs, and signs that we would look to Central Issaquah to use. But there are a lot of standards that we are retaining through the replacement regulations to retain the character, such as the existing goals and objectives and urban design guidelines, land use standards, including uses, heights, setbacks, and parks, plazas, and trails, many of which we'll talk about tonight. The urban villages also will retain their architectural review committees, and they will have their own architectural standards. The Issaquah, Central Issaquah Design Manual will not apply in the urban villages. Part of the reason that we have selected or proposed the ones that we did is that we feel that good urban design and best practices are universal, that they aren't part of creating the character, that they are just like a solid underlying foundation. And there was some concern, have we updated the urban village standards? And I just wanted to point out that, we started with Issaquah Highlands 20 years ago, and after about 15 years of implementing it, we worked on the Rowley Development Agreement, and a lot of what we did with that development agreement was look at our lessons learned, conditions we were regularly having to put on permits as patchworks to solve problems we saw in those standards, and as well as best practices that just were evolving in urban design and planning industry. And those got folded into Rowley, and then when Central Issaquah was written, many chapters of Rowley were the foundation for that. In terms of using replacement regulations with Central Issaquah, we've had to do this for quite a while. The development agreements and Central Issaquah rely on the Issaquah Municipal Code for missing elements, so we have always had to sort of toggle between multiple codes, and we are versed in helping applicants do that. And we have written a sort of outline of a director's interpretation to bridge the gap between the replacement regulations and Central Issaquah. For instance, where Central Issaquah is referred to as a place, use the terms Issaquah Highlands and Tallis to make that clear how we would fit those pieces together.
A question about this table. I want to understand it. So I think you're saying at the end of the day, there will be Chapter 18.19A and Chapter 18.19B done. Right? Though you have up there columns, those are the parts that are going away, and you're just showing where they're being incorporated into the IMC.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. I think what we wanted to do was look at what appendices and tools have we had in the development agreements, and where are those in either Central Issaquah or the replacement regs, and where are we carrying things forward from the development agreement, where are we using Central Issaquah, and where are we revising things in the replacement regs.
But okay, so I guess I'll have to see it when it's, well, maybe I'll look at it. I will. At the end, when it's done, based upon the element and where you are, somebody who's not in one of these urban villages today might stay in A. Someone who's in an urban village is going to be switching between A and B.
Yes.
How does that work? So, say I have a property, theoretically I want to redevelop it, and I'm in the Highlands. Does that work? I mean, how do I?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were still forming your question.
No. How does that? How does it work, practically speaking?
Right. So they would start with 1819B, looking at goals,
How do I know to go to 1819B?
Well, this is a challenge that the Issaquah Municipal Code has right now. And we look forward to reworking the code in 2019 because we don't think it is, even for Central Issaquah, as intuitive as we would like it to be.
That's kind of what I was getting at. It's super complicated, even for people who work in this area for their profession. It's complicated. And so I appreciate that acknowledgement in your answer and agree that it needs a rework. So the second part of my question is complicated for lay people and professionals. How about staff? Are you going to have a chart like this? Or it's just a matter of using the code? I'm going to the code like, just curious, it's not.
Well, so I think for a lot of citizens, it's going to be less complicated because a lot of the things that they deal with are in the municipal code. If you're doing decks and fences, they're going to come to us, ask us questions, and if there is some setback that we need, we're going to present that to them. So I'm not sure that I think it's a little more challenging when you're starting a new development, full new development. But as I said, this is one of the challenges that dates back 20 years. I mean, our fence standards for the urban villages are mostly in the IMC. Our public notice, we've had to, as staff, learn how to toggle between, know which part of the code we're getting from where. And as I said, it's not ideal. We would like to synthesize all this into a single document.
Great, that's all I wanted to ask.
So that was the thing that sort of jumped out at me too. So I have a question. We are going to expire the development agreements before we have a code in place that is suitable to amend and put all of this in and make it clear for developers, the public, and staff to use. So to me, I'm looking at this and it looks horribly confusing, if not even more confusing than what we have now. And is there, if the whole code is going to get looked at in 2019, is there a step that you can do now that dissolves the development agreement that leaves a simpler set of guidelines and rules in place than what we're doing here? Because this seems crazy. You guys may get it, but what if you leave, Lucy? What if Keith leaves? How will to me it seems overwhelmingly, maybe we don't have a good structure and now we're taking something else and jamming it in and making all these cross references. It seems untenable. Isn't there another way we can do this?
So because of, I guess, just from a starting standpoint, right now, the way our code works, it's by geography, right? If you're in Central Issaquah, there's a chapter for that. If you're in what used to be one of the villages, there's going to be a chapter for that, and then the rest of the city's under the balance, right? And so it looks confusing here, but there will be a chapter 1819B, and as you're in that, if there's not a regulation in front of you, so you say, okay, what's my building height? And it's going to tell you right there, but if there's not, if it actually is going to refer you to SIDS, it'll say, go to this section of 1819A. So it's going to give you the roadmap. It's complicated. I don't want to belittle that. But I think it is workable for hopefully just a year. I think our hope is that we would get the council to fund the recodification of 18 in 2019.
So I'm satisfied with we recognize that this needs to be dealt with. It's not uncommon to have complicated codes where you live in an area, particularly if you live in a potential annexation area that has adopted its core set of codes, but then you're referring to a county code. It's like this in Eastern Washington, and you have several potential annexation areas in the outlying county. So and you have to go back and forth. And the reality is, most people doing simple projects and even most people who are redeveloping or developing vacant land at some point have to go to the city or the county and get clarity on, help me connect the dots on what I have to follow. So that's not unusual. Ours is complicated. I'm happy to hear that we're going to address, that we're planning to address that.
There was something in the packet that talked about on an over 3-acre site, you use the IMC. Could you go into that, Lucy?
Sure. I actually have a process slide. Is it all right if we wait until we get there? Okay. Anything else on this? Okay. So now I wanted to talk about parks, plazas, and trails because we are retaining quite a bit of material from the development agreements. For parks, the existing situation in the Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement was that there was no requirement. However, there was a capital facilities plan and a master parks plan. And then as the community began to build out, the community values and character were established, and the UVDC came to regularly ask and work with applicants, as did we, to get them. In Tallis, there was a requirement for 100 square feet of parks, trails, and informal gathering areas per dwelling unit, but that was removed with the first amendment. We've still ended up with more than 100 square feet on average in Tallis. In thinking about what is the role of parks in the urban villages, we see that as an essential part. They are broadly distributed with basically every parcel or division having them. So for any net new dwelling units, we are proposing that you provide, a builder would provide 250 square feet per net new dwelling unit. So if you have a piece of property that is not being developed under the development agreement, you would have to provide 250 square feet per dwelling unit. If you were tearing down an existing project with 10 dwelling units, and you were going to build 14 in its place, you would have to provide an extra 1,000 square feet above and beyond what you are already providing. In working with PPC, we've determined that this would be on-site with certain locational and amenity expectations. The existing parks have been cataloged. We've met with the Homeowners Association of both Tallis and Issaquah Highlands to review those, and any changes to those parks to reduce or remove them would require council action.
So I was reading ahead. So did I miss the basis for the 250 square foot per net new residential unit and the 1,000 square feet of non-residential building? Did I miss that part?
So we looked at, as I said, we cataloged all the parks, and we used the average.
Thank you, sorry.
That's okay. I don't think I said that.
But it sounds familiar. I think you said it at the first meeting we had.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay.
The 250 is not large by itself. I mean, should we be considering like a minimum? I mean, it's a small little park if it's one, for example.
So we have found that almost you'll see the mapping. Mm-hmm. And I think once you see the mapping of where existing parks are, that might be a good conversation. I think that's part of why almost every project already has a certain amount. And so it would only be if they were adding units that they would be providing new park space. So I'm not sure, there are only some very tiny projects that may not already have park space that they would be adding on to. This would not apply to single-family homes.
just gonna ask that
I'm
question.
sorry, I should have said that, and I apologize. This does not apply to single-family homes. Except that if you were doing a plat, we don't really see this happening, but we do say that if you're doing a plat of 10 homes, you would have to consolidate that into a central location that was the part of that plat. Thank you for asking that. Any,
Okay, we're not on, I have a question on trails, we're not there yet.
okay. Plazas?
Sorry, can you go back one?
Sure.
Sorry. Okay, thanks. Fine.
So plazas. Issaquah Highlands Development Agreement had a commitment. There were a set of about 10 commitments in the goals appendix that said that there would be a town center plaza. And no size was specified, but there was a kind of concept drawing. So based on that, we had a lot of discussions with Port Blakely, and in the end, they provided 3 plazas. There's the Brownstones, the one that's sort of next to Marshall's, and then the one between Big Fish and Regal. So these 3 images are the town center plazas. And so we're requiring that those plazas be retained, and they are mapped. Talus Development Agreement didn't have a requirement, though. When they have developed the 2 parcels that formed the village center, there was an expectation of plazas, which is the one on the lower right in Spring Peak. And in looking at a variety of projects, I can show you that. We had a long discussion with PPC and the community about this. What we said was for all new non-residential, again, not under the development agreement, would provide 25 square feet per 1,000 square feet, again, with on-site locational and amenity expectations. And the Issaquah Highlands 3 plazas would have to be retained, and it would take council action to reduce or remove them.
Okay, next.
Trails. Issaquah Highlands had a very loose conceptual master trails plan. Talus had a much more specific master trails plan. But both communities have ended up with extensive trail systems, which are partly shown on our GIS system. Because trails are such an important part of both communities, we are proposing to retain from the development agreement both the general standards for trails and the specific trail classification standards, because the IMC and Central Issaquah don't really have comparable trail standards for us to use. If an existing trail was going to be removed or reduced, it would take a level 2 action so that there would be public notice and a public conversation before removing or reducing.
And who makes the decision?
That's a good question. I think level 2, it would depend on whether it was consolidated into a larger permit or with a smaller permit. That would be staff.
I would start out with,
Level 2 is pretty low, isn't it, Lucy? Doesn't even have, level 2 might not even have a public hearing, it might just have a notice.
Right.
Yeah, that seems a little invisible.
I thought it should be council action.
Okay. Okay.
But other people.
So right now, Lucy, and I'm asking this question because I don't know the answer, are all the trails in both villages, I believe that they are all currently maintained by the HOAs within those villages. I mean, so in theory, if somebody wanted to remove a trail, that application would have to come from the HOA?
So in Tallis, the HOA, I believe, owns all or virtually all. At Issaquah Highlands, there are some city-owned trails that are maintained by the HOA, so obviously the city would have control over those.
So it sounds like it maybe need to look at what that specific process looks like. Not sure that the council even has the authority to, if it's property owned by the HOA,
Right.
it's private property.
Right, but
We can require public notice, but not council action, probably. I don't know.
well, this would be true of some of the parks, too. A lot of the parks are privately owned as well. So I think one of the questions would be, for instance, if you're redeveloping a property and you're retaining the square footage, but you're relocating it, would that take council action? I think staff's thought is no, as long as you're maintaining a similar or the same size, that it would not require that. But those will be the kinds of conversations that we'll need to have based on the language that comes forward.
If we can, then I think we should.
Okay. So here's our permitting process. I think part of what we are looking at is that we are not going to have a master developer to work with any longer. We're also looking at the processes that are in the development agreements and the community expectations for public involvement. And so for site development permits, since we're looking towards Central Issaquah for the site development permits, the development agreements currently say if you have a 3-acre parcel or larger, you have to do an SDP. Anything smaller than that is an ASDP, administrative site development permit. When Raleigh went through and then Central Issaquah went through, we established 3 different levels of site development permits. They all were triggered by having a 3-acre parcel, but we recognized if we didn't have building sizes as well, like Raleigh, for instance, doesn't have any 3-acre parcels. So you would never have a community conversation, and that didn't seem consistent with community's expectations. So there's 3 levels, 45,000 square feet, 100,000, and 150,000. So we're saying 3 acres or a building, 45,000 square feet or larger would trigger an SDP, which means it goes to the commission, where there would be a public conversation and the commission would make the decision.
Sure, we both had questions about that.
So I'm not sure that I agree that the SIDS level is the appropriate level. So what is the IMC level?
I believe it's just 3 acres or being on certain streets.
Okay, and then 45,000 square foot, what building is that? Give me an example of the building that is.
Well, it would be about 2 Staples. I think those were around 25.
Yeah, it's too big.
Agreed.
I think what we're hearing from the community when we were talking about a moratorium and going into a moratorium was that they had felt that we had our eyes pretty far off on providing oversight. So I think that is probably not strict enough. I think I would like to see the Development Commission review smaller projects.
Okay.
I think I've even heard similar thoughts from staff about that, the review provision. Like maybe we went a little bit too, as Mary Lou said, eyes off. We were a little bit too lenient with that in the Central Issaquah plan.
150,000 is really big. And so I can understand that in retrospect. I do, so just as a immediate reaction, the thought of having to take basically every single building to the Development Commission just kind of blows my mind in terms of the amount of staff time that it takes to prepare to do that. Now, I think the thing we have to take away from this conversation is what you're saying, and think about what is that process. Maybe it is, let me describe the plat process and see if that has any resonance. Because it's not that we're trying to cut out the community, but we're trying to find a balance between community conversations and staff time and the results that we want from these processes. Currently in the urban villages for preliminary plats, we go to the Urban Village Development Commission, no matter how big. We've had 10 lot plats that have gone to the Development Commission because 4 is our threshold for a short plat currently. And then it goes to the council for a decision. That is not the process in the rest of the city. A plat goes straight to the hearing examiner. There is a neighborhood meeting, which is held by the applicant. Staff may or may not attend. And I think what we wanted was to find something that was kind of in the middle, and that if it was acceptable to council, we would propose that for the rest of the city. And that is that during the staff, when we get the full STP submittal, or the full plat submittal, and before we start writing the staff report, we would hold a community conference at the commission. And part of our goal in doing that is to not just talk to neighbors, because we want to talk to neighbors, but we want to have a community conversation, because plats significantly shape our city. And that we would have that discussion at the Development Commission. We would produce sort of a briefing response memo like we have been doing, where we go through all the topics that have been raised, both staff and applicant respond, and we reach a conclusion or make a recommendation. We would put that out for 2 weeks of comment. And if concerns were raised, we would go back and evaluate those against the code and incorporate them. If there aren't concerns, then that memo would be complete. That memo would be attached as one of the exhibits when we go to the hearing examiner, so that we are ensuring that the community conversation is part of the platting process, because with just the hearing examiner, we don't always have that community conversation.
That's fine as far as platting goes, but STP is so much more than that. And I think what we heard from the community is that it's at the STP stage that they felt like we were not doing enough. So I like what you said about platting, but it doesn't make me feel like 45,000 square feet is the right size.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Allowed uses. Issaquah Highlands had an extremely broad list of allowable uses, and we did a very detailed analysis at the request of PPC. For example, some of the uses are very low density and auto-oriented, like forest and ag product sales. There were also some heavy manufacturing uses that were allowed at Issaquah Highlands. I think it was kind of a surprise to all of us, because we hadn't seen that. We hadn't gone back to that use list in a long time. And then at Talus, even though it had a much narrower list, there were some things in there that we thought didn't really match with how the community and neighborhoods had built out. For instance, corner markets and antique stores in single-family neighborhoods. So we have, in consultation with public property owners and PPC and UVDC, narrowed the list to ones that we think are consistent with what's there, and which provide some flexibility as the community finishes building out and for future changes that come along. The one change that we did that's a little different than the existing list is PPC recommended adding assisted living in the commercial zones. It is listed as a residential use in, I think, the development agreements and the IMC, but specifically assisted living they felt, and I think staff agreed in the end, that it functioned much more like commercial. It was very comfortable in a commercial area. We specifically excluded senior housing and independent living, senior independent living from that. We are not trying to put senior residential uses into the commercial zone, but this one use that sort of straddles residential and commercial in the zone.
Lucy, what do other jurisdictions do with that? Have they put assisted living in commercial use, or can we find out if that's how others are doing it
Yes,
as
we
well?
can find out. I don't know off the top of my head.
I do agree with you that if you took out senior living and senior residential, that I agree that in terms of traffic patterns and employees and all the rest of it, it does function differently. But I'm just curious what other cities are doing.
Sure. Any other questions? The other part of land uses is the zoning caps for certain properties. Two big property owners, one at each of the two urban villages, have asked for something somewhat different than what they have. TriMet, which owns the parcel below Timber Ridge, has 516,000 square feet of office and office support uses. They have proposed to carry forward that office use, but allow a small portion of it to be converted to 77 townhomes. Shelter at Issaquah Highlands has around just about 1.8 million square feet of non-residential uses and 3 dwelling units. And they have asked for a broader range of uses than we have proposed, and allowing residential or being given mixed-use, residential mixed-use zoning. Staff and PPC and UVDC have declined to make that change. There is a minimum density at Issaquah Highlands currently. Those 3 dwelling units would have to be on a site no larger than 0.6 of an acre, which would be about 3% of their property. And so we didn't feel that that was justified giving them a residential mixed use. But there are certain parcels that have details beyond just plain entitlement, and the 3 dwelling units are captured in that more detailed chart. So we're not taking that away. We've offered to convert it to non-residential if they chose to do so. But if they don't, they can build those 3 dwelling units on, essentially just over a half-acre parcel.
So staff and PPC aren't recommending the conversions. What about the outreach to Issaquah Highlands community and the Taos community?
So at the very first meeting that we held with UVDC and PPC, Sarah Hoy, the executive director of the IHCA, said that they were neutral and they have not taken a position on this. Although I send all the materials to them, I have not heard any further comments or direction from Issaquah Highlands. Taos, this proposal is moving in a direction that the Homeowners Association is more interested in. They didn't like high-density residential. They were very concerned about having all the office converted to residential. They seem open to the 7 townhomes, but they also have concerns with getting certain kinds of public benefits and understanding what the implications are. So at this point, and I don't see Ken. I guess since he sent the letter today. No, I'm sorry, not that Ken.
Ken
That's
Bellamy.
a problem. We have repetitive names. Not Ken Eastman of the HOA, but Ken Bellamy of TriMet had sent you a letter, which I hope you all received. We got it today. Kind of outlining, I think they are still reaching out to the Homeowners Association, so we're waiting to see if over the course of the next month or 2, while we are reviewing this code with you, they may come to some kind of agreement, but obviously it requires you being in agreement as well.
Next.
Trees. We had proposed using Central Issaquah standards. Trees were in that. There is also the Issaquah Municipal Code. We know that through the discussion on compact schools, the council direction was that things that are in Central Issaquah use Central Issaquah trees, things outside Central Issaquah use the IMC, and we are fine with that. So we would propose to revise the language to reflect that you would use the IMC. FAR. So towards the end of this process, we realized that an FAR might be appropriate to ensure that we were efficiently using our land and getting the kind of development that was envisioned. This is something of a departure from the development agreements. Issaquah Highlands did use FAR, but as a maximum, not a minimum. There were target FARs for both retail and commercial. They were in the, as you can see, 2.5 to 0.75 for retail and 0.5 to 0.9 depending on the specific parcel. Residential did not use FAR. It used density, and in the town center, the minimum density was 5 dwelling units per acre. The maximum was 80 dwelling units per acre. Talus did not use FAR at all. Entitlement was tied to parcels, but there was a minimum density again for residential, and that was 23 dwelling units per acre. For reference, Central Issaquah has a minimum FAR of 0.55 for commercial anywhere in the urban core or outside the urban core on parcels that are 3 acres or more. Similarly, for residential properties in Central Issaquah, it's 0.75 in the urban core or properties over 3 acres outside the urban core. For existing projects, Gateway's at 0.75, and for a non-residential project, we don't have very many where the whole property has been redeveloped. So I provided Gilman Point and Lofts because a lot that is getting pretty far along in the process, and that would have a FAR of 1.8. Timber Ridge has an FAR, as I calculated it, of 2.4. For existing projects at Issaquah Highlands, Grand Ridge Plaza overall has an FAR of 0.3, but there's wide range between the blocks. Something like Safeway Fuel is as low as 0.03, but as high as 0.81 or 0.86 for Regal Cinema and the Port Blakely offices. When we look at proposed projects, Shelter's overall FAR based on their plat, which takes out streets, is 2.27. Looking at 2 of the very preliminary plans that have been presented to staff, the retail was at an FAR of 0.27. The medical office building is 0.65. For comparison, City Surf has, based on their overall entitlement, which we are now calling a zoning cap, it's 1.7, but the project that's proposed is at 0.24.
So Lucy, if you could draw a picture for us, if we are going to move away from what the development agreements allowed and go to the minimum floor area ratio of 1, tell me what the building looks like and tell me what it looks like when you go to 1. What's the difference?
I'm sorry, the difference between?
So right now they don't have to conform to the ratio 1.0.
Right.
So if I'm a property owner and I can go in and I can build X amount of parking at surface and a building of this size that's 1 story, when you change it to a minimum floor area ratio of 1, what does my project look like?
So probably mostly or significantly structured parking, multiple floors, and it may not be on, the height limits are relatively high, so they could choose to have parking on, say, half the site and building on half the site. I think we can go back and try and provide some better images to explain this. I think part of what we're seeing, again, is without a master developer working in partnership, we're concerned that we may end up with some low-density results.
I think so, I think what it does for shelter, the biggest impact is, I think, clearly on shelter right now, because, because they have both retail and commercial square footage, if they wanted to build something similar to Grand Ridge, I mean, you can look at the FARs from Grand Ridge, that they're not at 1, right? And so what it would say is you could not build something at that density if we put the 1 FAR in place.
So question then, Issaquah Highlands and Tallis have a look right now. They look a certain way. And if what we're trying to do is concentrate growth in the valley floor as a next stage before we change other neighborhoods, why would we want them to change the character of their building in Tallis and Highlands? Tallis and Highlands. Why wouldn't we want them to be able to build to match what's already there and encourage the height to occur on the valley floor? Otherwise, it looks like we're diluting it all over the city again, and we're not really focusing it on the valley floor.
So I think the biggest part of this is, so if you look at what Lucy has in the last column, which says that if you take the total FAR that shelter owns, the total entitlement that they own, which is
1.85 million
close
square.
to 2 million square feet. If you allow the low density, there will be a lot of entitlement that gets left on the books, right?
Right.
And so part of what the expectation of the community was, at least I know from some of, I think the messaging from Port Blakely kind of waned over time. But that original idea that you were going to have a certain number of employees working in office space and a certain amount of retail and a certain amount of residential units, that was an expectation that I think a lot of residents had. The question is if you allow for a lot of that to stay unbuilt, does that fulfill the vision that people had? Or is doing something like what's being proposed actually get us closer to maybe the outcome that people had envisioned when they moved in up there?
So instead of unbuilt, because assume Shelter Holdings could build now under the development agreement, or later with a floor area ratio of 1, are they being asked to build more because they're going vertical? Is it the same number of jobs, but it looks different? Or are you saying there's so much more capacity, Shelter Holdings should actually use more capacity than what they originally intended?
Yes, I think
Okay.
what we're saying.
No, I don't.
Well, I think what we're saying is they have close to 2 million square feet. I think that all of the EIS for Grand Ridge, the infrastructure, everything was planned for that entitlement to be built. If they build a quarter of it because there's no minimum FAR, is that okay? I think what we're saying is that, to get them at least halfway to the total use of their entitlement, that's what the 1 would do, assuming that number at 2.27 is accurate.
I'm kind of surprised that they could have an entitlement in a piece of land and not have been able to do that under the old rules, that we had to change the rules to make them to do that. And they bought a piece of land, they had an entitlement, but now what you're saying is we actually have to do this in order to get that entitlement.
So that's, well.
So
what
we're not proposing to change the amount of entitlement
No,
they have.
no.
Okay, I just want to be clear about that.
Was it buildable? Was it
But
on the other land with that low FAR?
It's the
could they have built
It's the
it?
same Atlas conversation, right? They had the ability to build mixed use there. They chose not to, right? Because we didn't make them. And so I think what we're saying here is if we're fine with single-story retail and surface parking, that's what you could get on their property without a minimum FAR.
Okay. Makes sense.
So we'll continue to talk, and this is very helpful to hear the kind of questions that you're raising.
I watched the video from the PPC meetings. That was very informative. And I was surprised because, and I think you and I had a chance to chat about this a little bit on Monday or whenever I saw you. And I think staff said, you know, we think council wants density, like we've talked about on the valley floor. I think you came through and said, you think we want that same density up there. That was a surprise to me, because I don't remember us having that conversation or even giving you that direction before. And then the other thing was, you have it even in the packet. It says there. Let me see. I grabbed the note out here. And Mary Lou was talking about this earlier. What we're trying to do is essential to retaining the character of the urban villages. And so this conversation about what's there at Grand Ridge Plaza and the FAR that calculates. So it looks like what you're trying to do here is let's drive more density, but it's not actually. And you said it a moment ago. This is where you're deviating, right? You're saying no, let's deviate. Let's not that goal that we wrote that said essential to retaining the character. So there is capacity that comes with the land. Get that. And then there's the character that we're trying to retain.
Well, I think that the thing I would add, because I think what you're saying is absolutely true, I think one of the things that we're very conscious of is that there is this expectation of live, work, play. And we, shelters entitlement, for instance, is 50 or 60% of the retail and the commercial. And so that's a lot of square footage to leave on the table to achieve that part of the vision. So I think it is to retain the character, but it's also to complete the vision. Same with TriMet. They have all of the commercial entitlement and a small portion of retail entitlement at Talus. And so the question is, how do we complete the urban villages?
Well,
just one last question. So what was does the Grand Ridge Plaza, how much entitlement of their entitlement?
They're building the last bits of their entitlement right now. It's under construction. I don't remember. It's 300,000 and between 300,000 and 400,000 square feet. I don't remember the number.
the vast majority of the comments that I've heard about live, work, and play have to do with the earlier proposals by Shelter Holdings to convert that to largely residential, multifamily, and the vast majority of residents that talked to me said no. I don't think I've heard from anybody. We're talking about something different. We're talking about forcing that commercial entitlement to be fully used. And what I'm hearing from folks is we would rather look at fields than have it converted to something that, they'd rather look at fields.
So we aren't proposing to convert anything.
No, I know,
Right.
but I'm not hearing anybody say, let's force them to build to the max. That's not what I'm hearing.
Well, so an FAR of 1 would not get them to build to the max.
Okay, so
But it would get them to build more, potentially.
So I'm just saying that there are a number of questions, and there are a number of ways to frame the questions.
Sure.
But I've not heard one or two were fine with the dramatic conversion that was proposed before. That's what I've heard. I'm not saying that nobody is or they haven't heard differently from other people, but I've talked to a lot of people.
So just to put one more fact out there, because your brains aren't full enough yet, I did a quick and dirty calculation. I'd say there's about 1,700 dwelling units within a quarter mile of the shelter property. So I think our perspective is, while yes, it's very nice to have vertical mixed use, and that was the original vision, we have already done a conversion as part of the development agreement that has been fully used. There is a horizontal mixed-use opportunity based on all the residential immediately surrounding this. and that it is not essential to convert more beyond what the development agreement allowed to achieve a horizontal mixed-use project.
Yeah, interesting first introduction to
Right,
this.
so lots to digest.
Yeah.
I think that's my last slide. Oh, so we're proposed meeting with you October 25th, November 4th, or whatever your regular meeting is, with a tentative adoption date in December. Oh, and we will need to do a hearing as part of the December 4th that we discovered. There are two documents that we were reading differently, but in speaking with Jim, we've got to provide some additional notice for people to participate in a hearing. We're going to send that out soon with the intent of hopefully having conversations with them, and it's adjacent property owners, and so we will get that started in the next week or two.
The other thing that that I'm sensitive to that I'm not seeing on here is staying in Land and Shore and then popping out at the full council, because we've had preliminary overview. We had a preliminary sort of overview discussion with full council. And so that for that to pop out 2 to 3 months later, just as an adoption, is fairly significant. Not the case with the moratorium items. So I would be looking to figure out a way that we could bring other council members along. The challenge with that is normally that would be a work session, and we're just jammed to the gills.
Right.
So I'm not sure what that looks like unless it's I think we need to talk about that, and I'm happy to do that at leadership or another venue if you guys agree that we want to figure out a way to make sure that.
Right, and the question is doing that as a collection or doing it individually, or both, as needed.
Anyway. Yeah.
So one thing we didn't talk about in this is that currently the Highlands, and maybe Tallis, I don't remember, are transfer of development receiving sites. And so what is the intention when this zoning comes in to do with the status of them being receiving sites?
So we have identified something that's kind of equivalent to the major modifications that the development agreements have. For instance, changing the zoning, changing the overlay, changing the parks, and use of TDRs is a council action. So that would only apply at Issaquah Highlands right now. But the outcome of all of these conversations are going to impact different work things that we have to do next year. So I'm sure that we'll be talking about whether TDRs can be applied through council action as a major modification is appropriate or not.
So there isn't consideration right now to take the TDR receiving site status off of the Highlands?
Right now, we're allowing it to stay. Because in the rest of the city, it would be an administrative action, and we're not keeping it as an administrative action. We're saying that it would, because you're changing the overlay, you would need council action to be able to do that if someone wanted to.
So it's analogous to an upzone. So right now, Tallis is not a TDR receiving site, it's just the Highlands. So what we've said is if you wanted to add, let's say that Regency Centers wanted to buy 100 TDRs so that they could do a mixed-use project in Grand Ridge Plaza, right? So what that would be analogous to an upzone, because it would be adding more zoning, it would be adding to their zoning cap. And so that would take council action just like a normal upzone would anywhere else in the city.
So I think there was conversation earlier about potentially identifying an area around the transit center and the current retail that's there that would be logical for potential council action of receiving additional density. But right now, part of the Highlands that's red is huge.
Right.
And the HOA has expressed a lack of interest in that being able to apply TDRs to single-family zones. They were open to it being applied to the mixed-use residential and the town center.
So I guess if it's not going to come now, when we do this piece of it, it ought to be on the docket of comp plan amendments to revise the TDR receiving area for the Highlands for next year, because I don't think leaving it the way it is makes any sense at all if we're going to adopt this new zoning. It doesn't make sense.
There are several things that once we have this piece settled down, that we're going to have to update to make them fit with it. But trying to move two pieces at once is kind of challenging. So we can, that is on my list of things that once when it comes out of, when we've resolved what the replacement regulations would be, that we will have, that would be one of the things to see.
The only reason I ask now is because the docket will come before us in about a month next year.
Really?
Doesn't it? Or is it January?
Yes, January.
Oh, sorry, it's January. Okay. Just as long as it syncs with that so that when we're seeing the docket, it's on there. That'd be great.
I think we talked about TDRs last time. I think, what you're proposing, council action here, you're ending the program effectively. It's what I mentioned that last year, or last time we talked about this. I still think that that's true. I would, effectively. I mean, if who would think about that? They want to buy a development right, but it requires council action to apply it. I mean, there's no guarantee they're going to get that. Right. So, I mean, that's a disincentive to buy that development right. That's a disincentive then to use that whole program to preserve, it's got two sides to it, right? Preserve open space, get more density. And so I think this, I agree with Mary Lou, and I think there's a lot of interest in this, is we need to take a look at that receiving site map. And if we retain any outside of the central area, it's going to be only through, I mean, serious consideration for where those locations are.
Well, and that could be, we could lay out where that goes and then update the map to match that. That's one of the challenges, is we needed to have this conversation before we're, or not just have the conversation, but complete the conversation before we can update the maps.
For more low questions. We had at one time talked about a transit-oriented development overlay, not this year, not as part of this. Okay. And then from your touches with the community, and not with the Residents Association or the Homeowners Association, what were their asks in, this isn't working, we want you to do something different? What were the topics or items that they had that they said, if you're going to give us a new code, make sure you deal with X? Because I can tell you anecdotally what I hear them complain about, but I'm just wondering what you heard in your public meetings.
I'm not thinking of anything, but I'll go back through and put together a list.
That would be nice in a thing to, if the complaint was about the size of parking stalls or whatever, in the new version of the code, you will see what we did here, or we chose not to do adjustment.
Okay, so when you speak of it at that level, I know the roads are certainly a topic, and that is an ongoing challenge between trying to keep traffic slow and not have super wide roads. I think that we have learned lessons from that. We aren't proposing to carry those standards forward for that reason, so that if we had new roads, they would use central Issaquah standards, which are slightly wider but still more urban than our street standards. But we'll think about that. That's helpful to have those examples.
So here's an example of one I heard, West Highlands neighborhood. School buses can't go down there. Fire trucks can't necessarily access all the roads that they have. Curbs that are damaged because they're running over the corner, and they're wondering what happens when Polygon builds. What standards do they use? Like, can school buses go through their neighborhoods? Can fire trucks fit through their neighborhoods? So that was just an example.
The comment? Are we ready for that? Okay. I imagine there's folks who want to comment. Great.
I'd like to thank Lucy for hanging in tonight. first. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to have a few minutes before you tonight. Appreciate all the work that you do in the city and that you're continuing to do, and especially hearing all the concerns relative to Issaquah Highlands. Briefly, I'll just state in my notes and be as brief as possible. We've been part of the fabric, really, of the Issaquah community for over 30 years. And with our High Street collection, our 21 acres in Issaquah Highlands, with retail and commercial entitlement, we're very excited to continue that legacy, and we're really looking at that property with another 20-year kind of horizon. We have been working hard to bring this project to fruition on this property for this past several years, and that effort has included significant outreach to the community in an effort to understand what they want and what they feel they need in the community. And I think a number of you have attended those meetings, but we had 6 different public forum meetings that we generated ourselves, and we got a lot of good input. And yes, we wanted the mixed use and the residential, and we decided, okay, we're going to listen to the vision and listen to the statements that were made, and for that reason we took away the residential component, except we still believe in it, but we're at that point now. We've had lots of discussion with staff. We've done significant research and marketing with the brokerage community, and we've had many meetings with prospective tenants and engaged now fully in all areas of this property. So as discussions began with the city, we made the city and the public were assured that the new regulations that were coming here that we're talking about would mimic the development agreement, and with practical updates to things like stormwater and critical area regulations, which we totally understand that makes sense. But unfortunately, instead of mimicking the development agreement, the code that the staff has proposed to replace the development agreement at this point has recently taken this very different direction, and I'm going really to the FAR conversation, but taking planning tools from central Issaquah that are typically used for the more dense and maybe most dense of urban areas and really applying them to Issaquah Highlands. And the most concerning of these regulations are the minimum FAR and the structured parking requirement. Imposing a minimum FAR anywhere near what has been discussed, what is most recently proposed, has a really severe negative impact on our property and effectively depriving us of all reasonable economic use that we want to follow. Even the Microsoft original full work program was at about a 0.4 FAR, just to give you an idea. And the community in all of those outreach meetings, I really appreciate the comments that we've heard tonight from all of you, because we don't believe the community wants to see a maximum, and we don't know that at this point in time, we can't see going too far of the departure from what we see now in mirroring our retail. But one of the main things in proceeding with doing some service parking and doing some of these components now is that we see 15 years from now, you could easily go to these higher densities if it made sense, and we were in a point where we had better transportation and all the other things that we want to see holistically in the community. And so by having some service parking, we can convert that to development on that same acreage, so we do get to a more intense use, but it's over time. And Connie earlier in her comments talking about property owners and the need for them to be able to have some transitional opportunities. You go to a large commercial development like University Place Shopping Center. When that started, it was very much a low density, and it's progressively developed over years. Bellevue Square, over many years, that density has all changed. So we're not thinking those terms for this property, but I'm asking you to be open-minded to looking ahead in time. And also, you are trying to centralize your development in the central area plan, and this is a significant departure. You're now taking density up to Issaquah Highlands. We're confused by this term. It's inconsistent with the stated goals that the city has had for replacement regulations, and is consistent with the messages that the public has been receiving. So we're very encouraged that we've been invited to have some additional conversations when we've talked about this, and we look forward to working with Keith and getting into a little more detail here next week. We've been working hard to bring commercial and retail uses to Issaquah Highlands, and are very excited about the proposals that we presently currently have now that we're working on in the city, and they're all consistent with the development agreement regulations. They bring jobs, services, amenities, and revenues to the city. And we are truly doing our best to fulfill this vision for the community. Request that you be reasonable and fair and not impose any unfair burden on our property. And we really do appreciate all the work that you do in the community. If you are not willing to consider our request to allow some vertical mixed use on our property, I just have this vision, please be thorough and thoughtful with respect to this proposed zoning and take the time to truly understand the impacts it will have. And I appreciate the amount of work you've put in and the really good questions that you ask, and we appreciate that and that it is on your mind. So thank you, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And thanks to staff. I really appreciate all their work.
Anybody else?
Good evening. I'm Tia Heim with Shelter Holdings. I want to echo what Gary said. You guys, I'm impressed with that you jumped right in and are asking all the right questions and good questions, so kudos for that. I guess I've been following this stuff really closely and working with Lucy and Keith and staff on this and participating in all the meetings along the way. And so I want to just suggest that you guys take the look that I think you're starting to from the beginning, which is to step back and look at a few really important items from a big picture. The first would be, what is your intent or goal with this zoning? Is it to allow Issaquah Highlands to build out with the regulations similar to those that are currently in place? Or do you really want to shift the vision for Issaquah Highlands to be something much more similar to Central Issaquah? Because when you start to pull things from the SIDS that dictate the density and form of buildings, you're going to get something very different from what you would get under the current regulations. I'd also ask you to consider when people talk about the original vision, what is that? Because I think it's different to different people, and it depends who you talk to and when they became involved with Issaquah Highlands and what they were told when they bought their house or moved into the community. So I think be cognizant that original vision means different things to different people. The next big question would be to jump into, is a minimum FAR really appropriate here, and why? You hear a lot of talk about what the maximum FAR would be if the full entitlement was built out. And I would submit that they're not really directly related. They're the same concept, but they're at vast extremes of the spectrum. So you really need to consider, if you're considering a minimum FAR, what does it achieve for you and what does it sacrifice? Because when you're looking at the proposals that we are currently bringing forward that are market-based, that are within the development agreement, everything that we are looking at doing now would be ruled out by a minimum FAR of 1. And it's not just retail that we're looking at doing. We want to build an 80,000 square foot medical office building with retail on the ground floor, so a true vertical mixed use building in Issaquah Highlands. And a minimum FAR of 1 would preclude that. So think about, is that the kind of thing you're trying to stop? The other part of that is questioning whether the appropriate analysis and study of the proposed minimum FAR has been done, or does more need to be done, and making sure that you understand how this type of land use regulation ties to economics, because it does get you to a point where you essentially take away all economically viable use of a property when it's not used properly. There's been some talk about FARs needed because you don't have the master developer control because the development agreement's ending. I'm just not following what that is, so I would be curious as to what that means. And then also remember that building at a lower density now doesn't preclude more building later. That's sort of the nature of development, and as things change over time, the building and economics change as well. The third question would be something that I think you guys are usually pretty sensitive to, and that's, has all of this been appropriately communicated to the community? Their voice is important, and I think that in the recent part of this process, there was this huge change made to insert the minimum FAR and structured parking and that element. And that was never communicated to the people. So when the initial outreach back in the spring happened in Issaquah Highlands, the message was, we're going to mimic the development agreement, and everything's going to kind of stay focused on maintaining the character. We're going to update the things that need to be updated, like stormwater regs and critical areas, and everything should continue. And really, from the average citizen's perspective, they shouldn't see a big difference. I don't think that that's true of what's currently proposed. So if you do choose to go that route, I would encourage you to re-engage that community and get notices out and do the outreach. We obviously have done a ton of it and have talked to a lot of people up there. Had all sorts of feedback on the stuff that we proposed initially with the mixed use. But one thing, 100% consistent, everybody wants more amenities up there. They want more retail, they want more restaurants, and they want more services. And so imposing a minimum FAR that stops or that ties those services to a level of office development that's not market feasible, meaning it cannot be built, you cannot go get a loan to go build that kind of building right now, precludes them from getting those amenities. So understanding that piece and communicating that piece to the community, I think, is important. I know, Paul, you mentioned that you watched some of the video from the PPC hearing. I think that's important. There were people there that had strong opinions, and so if you haven't, I would encourage you to go back and watch. And Fred Nystrom had testimony, and if it's helpful, it's at the 4250 mark in the hearing video. Steve Johnson, who's an architect that works with us, and we asked him to review the code from an architect's perspective, and does it work? And he gave them feedback that this is the single most confusing code I've ever encountered. He works in a lot of jurisdictions and has done this for a long time. So is that really the code that you guys are aspiring to adopt? There was a Issaquah Highlands resident, Jason Eden, that testified, and I think it's also important to look at the feedback from the UVDC and members and longtime residents. Carl Lee and Jeff Walker were both there. Carl spoke a little bit on behalf of himself and Jeff and indicated, like, there's a lot here to consider, and we need to make sure that we do it carefully. And they were surprised by a minimum FAR. Getting back to whether it's clear and easy to follow, I think you've received lots of input that it's really hard to follow, and there are some ways short of doing the full code rewrite, which I think it sounds like is needed, that can make this easier to follow, that could be incorporated here. Throughout this process, we've been very involved. Our September 28th letter that's included in your packet is the most recent comments, and we ask that you consider those. They're all still relevant based on the last version of the code that was made available to the public. We're happy to provide more information on any of those topics. One point of clarification to the memo, the staff memo from September 28th that was in your packet, we really were not asked to go get support from IHCA for residential. They stayed neutral, which is probably the appropriate thing for them to do in response to any kind of request like that in a community of that size. They did provide that comment at one of the PPC UVDC meetings, but then Sarah Hoey, the executive director of IHCA, also got up and spoke about the great need for affordable housing. So that's another thing to consider as you consider whether any transit-oriented development or residential, mixed-use residential is appropriate on all or a portion of our site. We'll continue to work with the staff on the regulations, hope that you'll take the time and effort to fully understand and make sure that the public is fully informed as well. One other thing I'll just throw out there is that there is no specific deadline in the development agreement for adopting this new code. So if you are not ready to adopt it on December 4th, there is nothing to say that you have to do it on that date. it's more important to get it right than to meet a deadline. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee?
I'm going to sound like Keith Niven, which just scares me. So, the original development agreement was for an urban village that we were sold, because we were here, to be something dense, multi-storied, parking, underground structured parking, Swedish structured parking. So it's been to our great disappointment that we have got this thing up there that is more like, oh, this doesn't sound like Keith, sorry, densely packed suburban. Now, the people who live there are going, wow, we like our densely packed suburban. But that was not the vision of the Issaquah Highlands. They were provided land, and they were provided amount that they could put on the land. They were provided the choice. Do you want to cover the land, or do you want to be tall? They chose to cover the land, to my endless dismay. And so when Mary Lou asks, what did and did not work in this development agreement? I would say what did not work is we did not get the density that we had anticipated to make this really an urban village. Right now we have the sardine suburbanism. So to go to the intent of the urban village and say, really? What we want is we want the density. We don't want parking lots spread out all over the land like we have currently with Swedish Hospital and, you know, and our shopping center there. Is an FAR the most elegant way to do it? I really have no idea. But I do think if we're going to keep building up there, we need to ensure that they do their structured parking, because we just don't have the land to waste like we have done on the valley floor. We don't want to do that again. So there may be some middle ground, and it may be just saying, hey, you know what, 50% structured parking, maybe 25. But the idea that it should look just like what was built, well, what was built was not what we were sold in the rest of the city. So then I'm going to do something equally strange, like not sounding like Keith. I'm going to thank Lucy. I know, Lucy, I'm sorry, and you're sick too. Okay, so I've talked to Lucy about this, and Lucy has listened and changed things where she thought it was appropriate and made sense. And so, well, I really am frustrated by how complex this is. I can't see a more elegant way to do the code at this point in time. So to me, it's a suffer until you can get it right situation. And I'm not going to blow up Lucy's concept, because if I can't see a better pathway, all it does is cause torture. And I would ask you all not to blow up that too, unless you can find the perfect solution. And I'm waiting. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Oops. Right, we're moving on to, oh, I'm sorry, Ken. It's okay, I was a little fast.
I'm not representing the Tallis Residential Association. These are my own personal comments. I do support leaving the zoning entitlements as they currently exist, and that matches the city staff recommendation. And this includes parcel 17B, which I believe should remain commercial. And I'll further add that I don't know anybody in Tallis that thinks it's a good idea to put residential on that parcel. So tree cutting for views, my concern is that I believe the current development agreement gives us some very specific protection in terms of prohibiting cutting trees for views after the build-out period. And I don't know that I'm comfortable that that same language exists in whatever the follow-on document is, whether it's the Central Issaquah Plan or the Issaquah Municipal Code. A little background, 3 years ago, the Tallis HOA authorized a green belt to be cut in order to preserve views for a handful of residents. The decision was wildly unpopular, and when the tree cutters arrived, the Issaquah police were called, the city was called, and Tallis was on the evening news that evening, and 100 Save Tallis Tree signs popped up all over Tallis and all the way along State Route 900 and down in the May Valley. So the city was called in to rule on this, and they ruled that during the build-out period that was okay, but after the build-out period that wasn't okay, based on our governing documents. And so, once again, my concern is I'm led to believe you can't do that after the build-out period. That's an important restriction for many people in Tallis, and I just want to make sure that prohibition is retained after the DA expires at the end of the year. Just a quick comment about the urban villages reverting to urban rules or CIP rules. Tallis doesn't feel urban to me, it feels suburban, and I think Connie made that pretty clear. And I hope there's no misunderstanding that Tallis is part of the Central Issaquah Plan. It isn't, it's Tallis. So when we pick and choose the rules that survive the development agreement, I hope that the rules in terms of the urban authoring in the Central Issaquah Plan don't take away from the current character of Tallis. So maybe some of those rules are just updated rules that are better rules in the Central Issaquah Plan, and I think that'd be fine. But when it comes to landscaping and trees and things that really are part of our character, it's perhaps the Issaquah Municipal Code might be better. Just to comment on the language in the single-family zoning, and I'm told that this applies through all of Issaquah, but the allowance of bed and breakfasts and temporary and seasonal uses in group houses doesn't seem fitting in my neighborhood. And if that's a future consideration to take a look at that being allowed, I would make that request. In the package, there's a reference to a 100-foot wooded buffer required on State Route 900. I don't believe it exists, and it's still unclear to me what that means and who's going to do that, and I certainly don't want my HOA to have to pay for that. So that's something that should be settled before the end of the development agreement. And I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sure.
So I see you and Lucy wildly writing down. Does that mean at the next presentation, you'll kind of give us a recap of a response to what you've heard? I mean, the one in particular, the cutting trees thing really resonated with me that Ken just said, and I get a recap next time?
Absolutely.
Of all of the comments?
Of all the
Okay.
comments.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thanks,
Okay.
Lucy. Next item, Agenda Bill 7326, Old Town Subarea Plan.
Oh, thank God, an easy one. You give us a bathroom break. Bathroom break.
Want to take 5?
Do you guys need
Or
5?
Just
Even 4.
4?
would be
Okay,
fine.
4.
Thanks.
Be in their packet.
Okay. You failed that
Okay, we're back.
opportunity to.
And the next item on the agenda is the Agenda Bill 7326, Old Town Subarea Plan. Keith?
Thank you. So I'm going to try and be efficient with our time, given the time of evening that it is. All right, Old Town Plan update. We're back. I was joking with Paul on break. We've talked about the villages. We've talked about Central Issaquah. The next stop on our tour is Old Town. All right, so I'm not going to spend much time just reminding you. We actually started this endeavor in 2015 with the Old Town Task Force. And we've been out to the community with 4 different meetings, and we did an online survey. And these are, and this is kind of where I want to spend most of my time, is these are the issues that we have come up with through our outreach. Current development regulations, both for the residential neighborhood and the cultural business district, allows development at a scale and character that is out of step with the neighborhood vision. And I'm going to unpack these a little bit so you guys can understand what I mean by them. So through the conversations, I think what we realize is the existing zoning regulations allow for buildings much bigger than what most people in Issaquah think is appropriate for this part of our community. And so if that is reality, then one of the things that we need to talk about as we move through this is how do we correct that if we need to? And what we've talked about is possibly talking about reducing the building heights for both Front Street and for the residential areas. Number 2, not a surprise for anybody, cut through traffic and regional traffic on Front Street and Sunset. It's worse now than it's ever been. Obviously putting together the no left turn signs during certain parts of the day aren't really enforced, I think, is a perspective that a lot of residents have. And I think that without some kind of proactive actions by the city, that this is just going to stay a detriment to this part of our community. And so we need to put some focus on that. Number 3, parking in many areas, especially closer to Front Street, is being used by transit commuters. What that means is that those spaces are not open during the rest of the day, and it makes it feel like there's no parking when there actually is a lot of parking, but people are parking, leaving their car in the beginning of the day, getting on a bus, going downtown, and then coming back in the evening and then moving their car. Number 4, business owners believe, and this is mostly on Front Street, believe that development codes are outdated. Impervious limits, setbacks, there are things that this came specifically out of the task force. Number 5, non-vehicular mobility, i.e. pedestrians and bikes, are not a priority. They don't feel like a priority. We've put a number of rapid flashing beacons on Front Street. But I think that there were some recommendations out of the streetscape plan, like doing a pedestrian scramble at Front and Sunset. If we're going to make this a priority, we need to understand it may be at the detriment of vehicular traffic. And that's huge for our city, because we generally don't do that. And I'm not being critical. Just being honest at 10 o'clock at night. 6, people spaces need to be made more usable. Interesting, based on the conversation we had about the usable spaces. And the fact that all of Lucy's pictures of plazas, not one person was in any of those spaces. I'm just saying. So pedestrian park, I think, was a great example of taking a space, putting a small amount of investment into it, putting the chairs and tables and the lights Fantastic. What we heard from the task force is there are places like the planters behind stands that, you know what, if you could get rid of those and make place for outdoor seating, that would be a much better use of that space. So I think it's looking at the spaces more critically, because I think, like everything else in our community, we don't have that much land, and I think as we kind of pack more people in, we need to use our spaces more efficiently. And then the last one is connection to the environment's really important to this part of our community. It's important to every part of our community, but it's definitely important to Old Town. You know, we have the creek running through Old Town, we have views of the mountains, and, you know, that element in this neighborhood is very important, and all the trail connectivity as well. So those are the main issues that we've seen. You know, I know you guys don't have this slide, and I will send it to you so that you can take a look at this and think about if there's things that you think we've missed. Thanks.
Yeah,
Awesome.
super helpful.
Okay, so this is gonna flavor all of the actions that we think we need to implement coming out of this plan. Okay, so the plan.
I mean, coming out of, sorry.
Okay. Okay, so the plan elements, so we've broken it up into community, connectivity and mobility, the environment, economic vitality, and housing, okay? And then within that, and I don't want to get into wordsmithing tonight, but basically what this looks like is there's a set of goals in the first column. So this is community, first element, community. Set of goals in the first column, and then the strategies in the second column, and then ultimately the way that we're thinking about the way this plan update will get formatted is there'll be a vision, there'll be the issues, there'll be the goals and strategies, and then there'll be the actions. And what we think we want to do is for the actions to break them up into things for maybe 2018, so what we do next year, and then the short term, which would be maybe 2018 to 2020, and then the long-term actions, which would be 2020 to 2025. Okay? And so that's kind of the concept that we're kind of sitting on right now. And I think what I'd like to do is just stop and ask you if you have questions. So we have obviously one of these for each of our elements. But then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and send you the draft full plan, and then let you guys read it before our next meeting. Does that make sense? And that way, if you guys want to wordsmith this, if you want to add any strategies, and then you can start to look at our action plan, which is, I think, where you guys really probably want to dig into and see how we are going to address the issues that we talked about earlier. How's that sound?
So no wordsmithing allowed. I had a couple of comments. Number one was, you didn't give us that first slide. And so I was going to, one of my comments was going to be, I'm still not sure I see where I'm going, but that first slide is fantastic. That is excellent. Is that actually, going back on reading the public's comments, you've totally nailed it right there, which is great. So second, when I went to look at the tables, the thing that was sort of missing to me is I didn't disagree with many of the strategies or even the goal statements per se, although I thought they should be prioritized. In each category, there is definitely one that belongs on the top. And under the first category that you had, I think the size of the buildings was something everybody talked about. It ought to really be, they ought to be sort of prioritized. The second thing that sort of struck me was, say a statement about the green necklace where we talk about missing parks. I need some data stuck in there. So if we have X acres of park in Old Town, but we think it needs Y acres, I want to see that in there so that when we actually come back a year later, we're measuring something.
Yes.
And it was, okay. So I actually just thought, more than words, there needs to be a measurement so we know when we're successful.
Okay.
Those were the only comments I had.
Okay, awesome.
Love the issue slide. I have lots of comments on this, but I will save that.
Okay.
No, I don't want to be wordsmithing tonight at all. So next step specifically is, I mean, I'm not cutting off any comments, but it's one of my questions. Sorry, you're going to, so say it again. You're going to come back.
So we would like to, so right now, we're scheduled to come back at the November meeting. I think that what we will do is send you guys a draft of the plan, which right now the plan is it's like 10 pages. It's not a long thing. All the background maps and all the data that we've shown you before, we're going to put it as an appendix to the plan itself. So the update itself is going to be short. It's going to be very action-oriented. We saw an example from Olympia that we really liked, and I think we've kind of mirrored that. So hopefully you like that, and that'll be what you guys get between now and the next meeting.
Or comments? Oh, questions, sorry.
Yeah, based on Dave's email or memo, I thought we were going to be wordsmithing. We're not going to go.
I'm going to send it back
Okay.
out.
I mean, I'm not actually, I wish we had time this evening, but that's what.
I think we would love to get all of your wordsmithing comments anytime.
There was one thing I didn't understand in the public comments, and that was talk about combining lots to build bigger houses. Is that a concern, or has that been realized? Have we had people buying 2 lots and consolidating them for 1 house? Has that happened? Or is it just a concern?
I think it's a concern, and it's part of, I mean, if we have this overall belief that a certain number of housing units within Old Town is important to keep up the vitality, you know, what you may want to discourage or maybe even not allow is the combination of lots to take down 2, what would have been 2 houses, and put 1
It
back.
hasn't happened, it's just that this is getting ahead of it.
Yes, I think part of it is trying to maintain the existing kind of quantity of housing within the neighborhood.
That makes sense. I wasn't sure if it was something that had already happened or we're trying to get ahead of.
I think they will, yes. Okay, public comment?
Hi, so I'll send in some written comments as well, so I don't nitpick the words as well tonight at whatever hour. Some things I'm still not clear on that were included in the packet. The E in Old Town still should be maintained. I'm not sure if the plan to move the Staples building out of the old central business district is included or excluded from that. I didn't like the idea of the awnings being required because that's not part of the character of that era of the buildings. I also find where there are a lot of food spills or water spills or stains and they collect dirt, the rain allows them to wash out. Otherwise, they just kind of sit there and it's looking kind of dark and dank and reason not to maintain them. I'd like to nail down what the height density for the buildings is going forward rather than having that continue to drag out as a strong point in people's minds. That's it for now.
Thank you.
I'm Keith McLean, and I own a piece of property on Sunset. It's been a vacant lot for quite a while, and I've wanted to develop it to build a place for myself. And I heard that you were mentioned height, and I hear they're considering 4-story to 3. And I was wondering if any of you considered, I have a lot that's only 39 feet wide. And the impervious is 50%, And I've struggled to try to design a building there for a long time that was practical and feasible. And so I was wondering, do you consider, I think you mentioned impervious. So if you want to go down, are you going to increase the, or how would it be, allow more area to be covered? Is that something that is, because I'm saying if you put a height restriction, I'm saying if that's if it was approved or whatever, how it goes, then that would really be difficult for me to do what I'm trying to do there. But if they're concerned about views, you know, would they go with more, less impervious? That would be correct? So I could spread out more? More impervious. Yeah, more impervious. So or would you just restrict the height on a small lot like that? I mean, does anyone hear what I'm trying to say here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you all got it, what I'm trying to say. Okay.
So this is a time for you to provide public, comment to us, or us and staff to consider. So,
well, I just thought I'd come to this meeting, and so I'm hearing this proposal, and I was obviously concerned about it because I own a piece of property there, and I've been wanting to develop for a long time, and been trying to come up with ways to develop it because of the 50% to go up to 4 stories, and all the stuff that follows with that because the lot is so small, and so I'm just trying to grasp for what you're talking about, because I know if you go 3 stories and you don't increase the pervious, then I've really got a bad problem there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have you talked to Keith before?
So I personally haven't. I know Dave has. But
okay.
So the impervious right now is way lower in Old Town than it is in the West End. And there's not really a reason for that. Exactly. There used to be for stormwater. We used to have a lot of flooding and stormwater issues, right? Mm-hmm. And most of that has been engineered out. So that was one of the recommendations that came out of the task force, was to change impervious.
Is that something you guys were considering looking at this time?
I think that is something that Dave and I think we agree with. Oh, sorry, Wes. So that would be something we would bring to you guys as draft code change to increase the impervious.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Ani?
Yeah, increase impervious, but not to 90%, because that was what was happening. First thing I heard was 90, and then it never changed from that. So I actually expect that they're going to come to you with some nasty high impervious, which I won't do. But people can't build on their lots with the impervious and heights as they are now. So that's got to change, because while we say they can, it's not physically possible. So in the issues page, there seem to be some conflicts between what the Downtown Association thinks should be happening and what the residents think should be happening. And so the Downtown Association wants taller, and the residents want shorter and smaller in scale. There's also some conversation about what the uses should be on Sunset Way, and potentially even as Old Town goes further south. Do we want to keep them non-retail? Do we want to start expanding them out further? Because right now, while you park at the trailhead, there's nothing to do except for go to the dentist on that end. Or Stacy's, I'm sorry, you could go to Stacy's office. It would be a hoot. But it does seem unreasonable to try to bring a bunch of people in to recreate in your town and then not even provide a cup of coffee within the near vicinity to serve some of their needs. And so these are some of the use issues that I don't see on his list there.
Thank you. Anybody else? Nobody else is here? Okay.
I had one more comment.
Sure.
I heard it mentioned about combining 2 lots, and I understand that, but on Sunset, because I'm talking about Sunset, most of the lots are small. And so and I don't plan on combining lots because I have a big building that I designed on 5th and Sunset there. But if they're wanting to keep one single lots, that's another reason why, and not combining two, so someone could build something, because you're restricting the heights of something that could, make economical sense, then that would be another reason why, if you're going to come down lower, to try to increase the impervious. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to our last, all right?
Last.
Oh, phew, okay. Well, I saw a couple of the things there, and it was a moment of panic. Agenda Bill 7483, 2017 amendments to the comprehensive plan, scheduled for action, and Trish Heinonen, our policy planning manager, is
Packet
here.
up here at one time, or did she close it?
No, it's there. It's under the E.
Under the E?
So can I help you?
Yes. You'll be happy to know that these are a lot easier than last year's comp plan amendments.
Oh, she's
That's the
opened new
good news.
things. She's opened, there it is.
At the very end.
So you want that presentation? That works.
Yes. It's thinking.
Thinking.
So, do finger puppets.
Just wait, it's still, so look up at the little tab there. There we go.
Yay.
Yay.
Okay. Okay, it's different than, yeah, we're going to go really fast. The good news about the comp plan amendments this year, we do this every year because of state law. There are a lot of items on the docket we did not get to this year because we were so busy with the moratorium items, so the amount of comp plan amendments this year is very small. We updated the housing units toward the state targets. We updated the pop chart, which we do every year, and we changed the annexation maps because of King County Island. We did several rezones and redesignations for city-owned land, and the transportation improvement program that you already approved goes in during this, so that we didn't change anything. We just, it's something we have to do every year, is make it officially part of the comp plan. These are the housing units that we got this year, that they're actually newly built units that we get to count towards our target. There were just over 1,000 this year. So the units now needed to meet the target is just over 1,000. We cleaned up the chart a little bit to get rid of those annexations that happened before 2006. Obviously, we all know now that you cannot count annexed units in the state target, but we want to let people know that when they see a bump in our population, that it's annexation and not building, because they always say, well, what about those 100,000 whatever units? Those don't count towards our target.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So when you say 1,200, so what is this? What does this not include that's under construction right now or that we know is in the pipeline?
The only ones that count are the ones that are finalized. The state.
That wasn't my question.
Oh.
So we're building right now. We've got a lot of developments going on.
Yes.
So what, maybe Keith, I don't know who's going to answer the question.
Gateway, Vale, Inniswood,
Oh, the West
Riva
Highlands.
would all not be
None of those
in.
count.
Okay, so assuming that they all get occupied, how many units is that?
That's 4, 5, 6. That's about 600 and some change.
Okay,
So it's halfway.
the target
Yeah.
that's up there, okay.
Right. Any other questions on this one? Okay. The pop chart, which those are in the ones that you and Keith just mentioned, those are figured into the population and household chart, and the OFM numbers from the state. Also, I don't remember if you remember, I'm sure Paul remembers, the chart that we used in the housing strategy on which year we think we're going to go over. Those numbers have been incorporated as well as we can into the pop chart, as well as now that we know how the Talus and Highlands entitlement is going to end pretty closely, those numbers have been updated as well. So the pop chart is as current as we've been in a long time. This is our last potential annexation area, which, as you know, we really don't want it. We've told King County that we don't want it, but it's still there. But that's the last one. So that's, I think, as the one that's annexed them all, I'm really excited that we're
Recently
almost
heard that
all
we had
done.
no more.
This is the annexation history map that would also change with the King County Island and the Bellevue Utility Island. And these are the ones just since 1990. We've been really, really busy. The rezones and redesignations, there were many this time. Just to let you know, we let the property owners know within 300 feet, so we sent about 200 letters. And as you know, you already set the zoning for the King County Island. The first 5 are the ones by the roadway, 62nd, that are coming in. They'll all be open space and wetland mitigation. That's up by the Costco Road. This one is the fire station one. That would be Eastside Fire and Rescue. Stop me if...
That's on East, it's on East Lake
She's getting
Stam.
ahead of herself.
Yeah, when did we decide that was going to be a fire station?
It's not
Oh, well, I
yet.
heard we bought it with fire mitigation money.
Purchased with fire mitigation money.
Okay, so that should be, we need to clarify that.
Well, the intended use is just to let people know that it's not like a hazmat site, because that seemed to be what got people nervous when we would send out letters of these kind of rezones, is what the city plans to use it for, or...
That's fine, but property
Right.
6 was, explaining, property 6 was purchased with fire mitigation money. Period.
Right. Well, that doesn't go in the code anywhere or in the comp plan anywhere. That's
But it's
just
in the packet, and so I think that needs to be clarified, that because it's not
In the agenda bill,
accurate.
maybe? Okay.
It's not accurate that property 6 will be used by Eastside Fire for a new fire station and for other, nobody's ever talked about that.
Okay. They're going to have a
Thanks.
problem with the way they paid for it then.
No, that's okay that they paid for it that way.
And
It's a fact.
I understand what you're saying. Well, so I understand what you're trying to, your point is, we have to use it for,
something or else.
I get
or
that,
else
but
pay it
that's
back,
not
right.
accurate.
Okay. I'll change that in the agenda bill.
We're missing a step
Say
there.
It might not. It's not.
Or it could say it would be purchased with the mitigation fees that you're talking about, and
For the possible.
first, then explain what the site, maybe, well, I don't know, but
Right.
jumping to it will be a fire station, it's nothing that we've
Okay.
talked about, okay?
That,
Maybe restrictions on how we use that based on how we paid for it.
right.
That's the next explanation.
Right, and that's not in the comp plan at all. This was just to help with the slide. So your point is well taken.
Thanks.
This is owned by the Overdale Homeowners Association. This isn't public property, but this is like the Janet Wall property last year. They thought it went so well that they wanted to do it as well. So this is their protected deed property that they want to be conservancy.
It lowers their taxes.
Yes.
Oh, really?
But it sure felt good, though.
It felt good.
This one, is on Front Street, and we bought it to become a future park because we own the ones, I believe, adjacent to it. So we're working on the linear
It is,
piece.
what is this one?
It's right across from Bush on Front Street.
Next to the creek, kind of next to your old office building, kind of down there south of Sunset.
It's where they demoed the houses. So across from Old Front Street Market and down slightly.
So was there an policy about this becoming a park? It's public property, but.
You could say the same thing. It was purchased with parks mitigation.
Right, and
No,
it's
the
just
bond.
for recreation, and you could certainly change it. We asked them not to make it facilities, because we knew we'd had issues with that last year when they tried to zone it without a plan to have it be facilities, so we just went with recreation.
So I think you're understanding the sensitivity, jumping from buying properties with certain monies or zoning and jumping to policy decisions that haven't been made. I'm not aware, and maybe we talk about a lot of things, so maybe I forgot, but I don't think we've had a discussion about this is going to be a park.
Right, well, I got this from the Parks Director, so I'm just going with that he's talked to someone that.
We might be in a funny position where this might be in the new strategic plan, talked about a little more, which we haven't seen yet for parks, but it would be a fair statement to say that it was purchased with money from the Parks Fund and just leave it at that.
Right, truly, we own it already, and it was, right.
Yeah, and then the policy piece will happen when it happens.
Yep, when you all do that, right. And again,
maybe
we
you
were
wanna
just trying to let
revise this
people
one,
know
too.
that live nearby that this is what that it's a narrower use versus it could be something that might scare them. This is water over the bridge because you've already done this. Woo!
That's
And this is the TIP that you've already approved, and this goes in the comp plan. And hopefully, well, I don't know if you want to see it, but you already did all this. You already did all this work. It's just the official part. And
I don't understand that County Island part. Can we go back?
do you want to go and just for old time's sake? Doesn't that feel good? You're all done with
Just
that?
kidding.
Woo!
No, don't even put that slide up.
Isn't that exciting?
Wait, it's got lines there. All right.
Oh my God.
So,
Those are slash
anybody have
marks.
any questions or? No. Comment, Steve and Connie?
I already got mine this year.
You did, I think. You did. You don't get another one for a while, you know? You wouldn't work as hard. So I was on the King County website, and they seem to think we have some other annexation open spaces in the Issaquah Highlands. So we need to figure out if that's true.
Contacted Karen Wolf, because they don't say that they're PAAs.
Okay, so this is public comment, so
Sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah.
anybody else? Okay.
Would this
Anything
be
else
on
from the-
consent agenda?
No,
Dang it. Okay, I just thought it was worth the ask.
it probably won't take very long.
I'm kidding. Yeah, I'm
I
kidding.
know.
You know, I'm kidding.
No, we never put them on consent. Plan amendment? Plus, we want those numbered, we want the POPs page out there,
The pop chart? Yeah.
POP chart,
That's exciting.
yeah.
Can I close all this down there, or is there more items you would like to see?
No,
No.
thank
We're
you.
waiting for you.
Waiting for you to close the meeting.
Okay, anything else? We're adjourned.
Bye.
Nice work. I will let Wes do this.